Chapter 10:10. Yin-Yang smiled faintly. It's hard to be content with one's greed. This is an unavoidable mentality for any cultivator or human being. Even I can't avoid it. However, I really don't wish to trade too many resources this time. Since all of you have come personally, let's set the upper limit at 900,000 worth of resources. What do you think? A considerable portion of the last million worth of resources was Yin-Yang's commission. This time, 100,000 was deducted. Nominally, Yin-Yang's commission was reduced by 100,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces. But in actual fact, the total value of the traded resources was set at 1,000,000. It was almost double of the previous transaction. The previous time was 600,000, while the rest was Yin-Yang's commission. Once the commission was collected, it could not be reduced anymore. It looked like a concession of 100,000, but it was actually an increase of 400,000. A concession of 100,000 was still an increase of 300,000. Moreover, it was only a concession of 100,000 this time. The future transactions were still 1,000,000. It was an exorbitant demand. The General Commerce League and the others looked at each other, their faces pale. This was Yin-Yang's immediate retaliation. I've already made it clear that it's not good to open the spirit's grave too frequently. It's only been a few days, and the General Commerce League can't wait anymore. Even requesting to open the spirit's grave again and again. Where do I stand? Of course, I have to set a limit on the total value of the traded resources. To Yin-Yang, this was understandable. A transaction should be fair and just. If one party were to compromise, the other party would only be more aggressive and exploit them further. How could Lang Fantian not understand this? With an inward sigh, he chuckled dryly and said, "Of course, we'll follow Brother Yun's wishes. The General Commerce League's need for the Qi of Vitality is too urgent this time. It's been hard on you, brother." To Lang Fantian and the General Commerce League, Yin-Yang had gained a lot from the recent transaction. Although the League's request this time was a little too eager, it was also in consideration of the bigger picture. Compromising a little would only strengthen the partnership, especially when Yin-Yang had already received a lot of extra benefits last time. It would be best if he did not accept it this time, saving a sum of money for the General Commerce League. Unexpectedly, not only did Yin-Yang not give in, he had even set a limit on the total value of the traded goods. It was as if he had turned the tables on the General Commerce League. The meaning behind Yin-Yang's words was profound, containing two layers of meaning. Firstly, they were working together using real money. He would give as much as he was supposed to. This was set in stone. Secondly, it was the content of the transaction. If the League wanted to make multiple transactions within a short period of time, that was fine. But the total value of the traded goods had to be decided by Yin-Yang. Other than Yin-Yang's self-deprecation, he was also accusing the owner of the spirit's grave of having ulterior motives due to the frequent transactions. What should he do if there were no frequent large transactions in the future? Furthermore, there was Yin-Yang's intention to mock the General Commerce League's eagerness for quick success, forcing them to do things that were beyond their control, and being dishonest in doing things. Lang Fantian and the others were veterans in the martial world. How could they not understand the true meaning behind the words? However, they were helpless against Yin-Yang. After all, Yin-Yang was the seller's market now. They could only suffer in silence. It was just a sentence, but it was equivalent to limiting the total value of the General Commerce Alliance's transaction. It might even cause the purpose of this transaction to fail and return in disappointment. The corners of Lang Fantian's lips twitched, but he did not speak. The General Commerce League's decision this time actually had another layer of consideration. They wanted to use this opportunity to test if Yin-Yang's claim that opening the spirit's grave too many times would bring harm to himself was true. This was a crucial point. However, based on the current situation and Yin-Yang's unyielding attitude, there was a 90% chance that this was true. Not only did this test cause them to suffer a great loss, they had also severely offended Yin-Yang. At the very least, their relationship was no longer as harmonious as before. Yun Yang was still welcoming the General Commerce League's people into the guest rooms of the residence of 9 Supremes enthusiastically. Once Lang Fantian and the 8 Great Vajras entered the residence of 9 Supremes Mountain Gate, they were genuinely shocked. Their eyes were gleaming, filled with extreme disbelief and incredulity. After settling Lang Fantian and the others, Yun Yang excused himself and left without further pleasantries. Yun Yang had a lot of things to do now, especially to give these people time to react and space to communicate. The General Commerce League's action this time was reasonable and expected to Yun Yang, but the League's reaction to Yun Yang was not necessarily the same. What he should do now was to give the other a relatively private space to think about the future. After Yun Yang left, the General Commerce League's people gathered in a large circle. It was hard to tell who was in the lead. Lang Fantian stood at the side of the circle, deep in thought with a frown, his expression dark. Xiao Jiang, who was the first to speak, saying in a low voice, "Why does this sect leader Yun seem to have seen through my identity?" Lang Fantian chuckled humorlessly. "It's not that I admire Yun Yang, but this sect leader Yun is a rare character in the bound of universe, be it in terms of scheming or tactics, despite his young age. It's not too surprising that he found something unusual about you, boss. Let's not talk about anything else. Just the decision he made just now is shocking, isn't it?" Xiao Jianghu said, "Oh, I didn't know you have such a high opinion of this sect leader Yun, Fantian." Lang Fantian sucked in a breath and said, "I thought the General Commerce League had some judgment on this sect leader Yun, but now I know that it's not the case. Do you know, boss, that when I first met Yun Yang, there were only 2 of them, but they'd already made a name for themselves as the Raiders of All But God? Even when they were doing business with the General Commerce League, the entire process was easy and smooth." Xiao Jianghu replied with a chuckle, "How can I not know this? If it weren't for the opportunity that day, how could we have met today?" Lang Fantian shook his head. "That's not the only reason I value this child. There are many secrets that can be unearthed from him, each of them earth-shattering secrets. Not only are our abilities far superior, but we also know the value of these secrets, but we dare not make a move. At most, we're probing carefully, tracing back to the source. There are many unexpected factors, but most of it is due to Yin Yang's actions." Xiao Jianghu nodded and said, "That's true. I've heard Fantian say that this child is extraordinary. Although I thought that this child must have something extraordinary about him, I still underestimated him. Now it seems that this child is truly remarkable." The residence of 9 Supremes was already taking shape when we met for the second time. Now it's the third time the residence of 9 Supremes is already taking shape. It's only been 2 to 3 months, but each time we meet, it's accompanied by a sense of wonder. All the wonder comes from the achievement he's made in such a short period of time. It's something that no one else can achieve. That's why I said that there's nothing surprising about him seeing through boss identity. Lang Fantian sighed. On the contrary, I'd be surprised if he didn't. Chapter 10-11. Xiao Jianghu chuckled. "You mean, Leader Yun pointing out my identity is a reminder to us?" "Yes. If he didn't point it out after seeing through it, we'd suspect his ulterior motives," Lang Fantian said frankly. "Now that he's seen through it and set it on the spot, it's equivalent to giving us information and his attitude. This child has always been steady, neither humble nor arrogant. His actions are well-grounded. There's no need for him to show off." "That's true," Xiao Jianghu said after some thought. Lang Fantian said, "As for his attitude just now, from what I can see, it's reasonable as well. We've cooperated a few times, and the transactions are huge. On the surface, Yun Yang's side has the upper hand, but in reality, more than 80% of the benefits he's obtained are given to the spirit's grave to obtain the most valuable treasures. The General Commerce League, on the other hand, is the one who can easily obtain the best treasures." Lang Fantian concluded, "Therefore, I think that such a collaboration is only beneficial to us. It can go on for a long time. And to do so, one of the prerequisites is to build a good relationship with Yin Yang. We mustn't trigger his resentment because of a momentary loss. Like this time, consecutive transactions within a short period of time are taboo for Yin Yang." We need to express our sincerity to make up for it later. Xiao Jianghu's gaze was thoughtful. After a long moment of thought, he suddenly changed the topic and said, "The spiritual qi density of the residents of Nine Supremes right now. I'm afraid it's not much weaker than the General Commerce League's headquarters, is it?" Lang Fantian was taken aback and answered after a pause, "Yes." "Fantian, haven't you realized the difference? The reason our league headquarters has such a spiritual atmosphere is mainly because of the middle-class celestial luck banner. But the residents of Nine Supremes doesn't even have a lower-class celestial luck banner now," Xiao Jianghu said in a low voice. "If the residents of Nine Supremes obtains the celestial luck banner, the spiritual atmosphere within the mountain base of the residents of Nine Supremes will definitely increase tremendously. It can at least be on par with the General Commerce League's headquarters. Does anyone here doubt this? Indeed, there's no doubt about it. But here's the problem. Even if the residents of Nine Supremes possesses a spiritual atmosphere equivalent to that of a middle-class celestial luck banner, after obtaining a lower-class celestial luck banner, don't you think the commotion in front of us is a little ridiculous?" Xiao Jianghu's thick brows knitted together. "I can basically say that as long as there aren't any major changes, the residents of Nine Supremes will rise in the future and become a formidable foe to any sect in the bound of universe. The threat is huge." His words were filled with emotion. Lang Fantian kept quiet for a moment before he spoke. "I think the chief is worrying too much." Xiao Jianghu tilted his head. "Oh." Lang Fantian thought about it and spoke from the bottom of his heart. "I have something to say that's stuck in my throat." Lang Fanyan's way of addressing himself changed again and again. At this moment, he no longer addressed himself by his real name, nor did he address himself as the seat or subordinate. Instead, he suddenly changed the way he addressed Lang Fanyan to little brother during the conversation. This meant that the current conversation between the two parties had turned into a conversation between brothers. "Speak," said Xiao Jianghu. Lang Fantian coughed and cleared his throat before he said, "I think that Big Brother's current thinking is too utilitarian and has already deviated from the League's initial purpose of founding." Xiao Jianghu kept quiet for a moment, only looking at him without saying anything. The League's initial purpose of founding is to convey its name and ambition. The General Commerce League is both the League's name and the League's ambition. Although there's the grand idea of accepting merchants into the League, it's still mainly about business. Lang Fantian continued, "It's the word business that determines the League's essence. The bound of universe is obviously inseparable from the business world. Based on this principle, the League has developed rapidly, especially after going through the extreme hardships of starting a business. It's almost smooth sailing. The premise that we're the Commerce League has allowed us to have no fundamental conflict with other sects, aristocratic families, and sections. Since there's no fundamental conflict, they won't see us as a threat that must be eliminated. That's why we've come so smoothly until now. Even if we successfully ascend to the upper-class celestial luck banner this time, the Commerce League will still be the same to us. At most, we'll have more protection and fewer people will dare to covet it, but it won't change the League's own principle. This is the only way we can ensure the League's continued existence. Perhaps the residents of Nine Supremes will soar to the nine heavens in the future. Perhaps it'll dominate the martial world. To the other sects and forces, it may be a threat or even an enemy that can't coexist. But to the League, it won't cause too much damage. We can even complement each other's strengths with the residents of Nine Supremes and work more closely together. As the saying goes, a small clue can reveal a big picture. Based on the current situation, our cooperation with the residents of Nine Supremes is already constantly increasing the Commerce League's strength. In summary, this young brother thinks that the residents of Nine Supremes is not a threat to us." He had stated his meaning clearly, but he still came up with such a conclusion, making others feel that there was more to his words, or that he had not finished. Finally, after a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and said, "In addition, this young brother thinks that there's a limit to the League's development. We, on the other hand, can't go beyond this limit. Once we go beyond the limits of this framework, we'll be faced with a calamity. But if we restrain ourselves, we might be able to continue existing for thousands of years. Just like counting 9 to 5, the dragon soars in the sky. It is the supreme form. But counting 9 to 9, the dragon will have regrets, it will decline from its peak. What we need to be is the dragon soars in the sky, not the dragon will have regrets. Lang Fantian finished his long speech in one breath, sweat already beading on his face. Many of the dozen people who were listening by the side were sweating as well. Lang Fantian was truly bold, to be so blunt with his words. It was truly a taboo. Xiao Jiang, who had been listening with a dark expression, not speaking for a long time. After some time he finally asked, "If that's the case, then where do you think the General Commerce League's limit is?" Lang Fantian mustered up his courage and finally spoke. "Above the upper-class Celestial Luck banner, and below the gold-class Celestial Luck banner. There are many who have attained the upper-class Celestial Luck banner, and this is where our development reaches its limit. If we go beyond that, not only will we draw the attention of many supreme sects, but will also be feared by the palace level. The end of the world will come, and there won't be many days left." Xiao Jianghu hung his head, falling silent once more. Chapter 10-12. Lang Fantian's face was pale, beads of sweat dripping down his face. Even his breathing was uneven. Such a state should not have appeared on an ace cultivator like him. It was because he was the only one who could say these words, as a vice chief and as a sworn brother. If someone else had said it, however, it would have been a catastrophe. In spite of this, he felt much more relaxed after finally voicing what he wanted to say. In recent years, the General Commerce League's overall capability had grown stronger, while their boss aura had grown as well. It was an understatement to say that he was not angry. There were even some radicals in the league who were eager to make a move. If this went on, it would not be a good thing for the General Commerce League, as it was a hidden threat that could lead to its demise. Take the current incident as an example. Before this, the League's first thought when encountering an organization like the residents of 9 Supremes would be to work together and support them sincerely. It would be best if they could work together seamlessly. Now, however, their boss had thought of the threat almost immediately when they were still working together. This was an extremely ominous sign. Another long time passed. Xiao Jianghu finally raised his head amidst the dead silence. He looked up at the sky and said faintly, "Fantian, thank you. We've been brothers for so many years. Today is the first time I'm most grateful to you." Lang Fantian shuddered and said emotionally, "I believe the boss has a plan in mind. No need to be humble," Xiao Jianghu said softly. "The League is the League. You're right to remind me. I've been flattered too much all these years. This time, it's you who's more far-sighted." The others comforted him at the same time. "After this war, I'll come up with a new rule to stop the League's ambition that it shouldn't have. Like Fantian said, the League is the League. The path of a merchant is never easy." Xiao Jianghu chuckled humorlessly. "If we work our way up, even if we reach a level that surpasses the Sacred Heart Palace one day, can we really surpass the palace? We'll still be annihilated sooner or later. It's better to maintain the path of a merchant, to mediate between different forces with ease. That's the long-term path to long-term peace. Since that's the case, then when we reach a certain point and can still stop, we'll show some weakness and hold back some of our strength. This is the true Tao of the entire body, the foundation of the eternal legacy." Outside the window, a voice suddenly sounded. "Alliance Master is wise." When everyone turned their heads to look, it was Zhang Changgong, who had returned to his youth, floating in. He had a gratified look on his face. To be able to hear these words from the Alliance Master. "I can die without regrets." Senior Zhang, Lang Fantian's words reminded the group of this person's identity. Everyone was shocked when they heard him, turning to look at him simultaneously. Senior Heavenly Sword. Although Xiao Jianghu was prepared for Zhang Changgong's state, the visual impact was too much. He never thought that the old man, who was on the verge of death, would return to his youth so thoroughly. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Due to Zhang Changgong's arrival, everyone's small talk became heated. "No matter what, the deal at the spirit's grave has to go on tomorrow. We must still get the Chi of Vitality. At most, we'll give more compensation to Leader Yun later. Xiao Jianghu finally said. Advancing to the upper class isn't only our long-cherished wish, it's also the League's future cornerstone. If Senior Li Yisan can't recover, the General Commerce League has no chance of winning. Zhang Changgong smiled and said, This old man thinks that it's possible. Xiao Jianghu's thick brows relaxed as he asked in a low voice, How so? Please enlighten me, Elder Zhang. Zhang Changgong replied, Chief, our deal this time has been a little too hasty. We want to maximize the probability of obtaining the Qi of Vitality and increase our qualification to obtain the upper-class Celestial Luck banner. This is, of course, within reason and without fault, but it's a form of coercion to our cooperative allies. Any beautiful words to cover it up, or even to make up for it, after the event has already created a rift between us. Yun Yang, Leader Yun, is very displeased with what we're doing, be it verbally or in his heart. I believe that you won't turn a blind eye to this, nor will you deceive yourself and others. Xiao Jianghu's expression remained the same as he said indifferently, How can I not know this? However, this is indeed a must for our league. Those who achieve great things don't bother with trifles. Even if it's against justice, it must be done. Zhang Changgong smiled bitterly and sighed softly, saying, Chief, do you think that this old man is criticizing you, or even speaking up for Yin Yang? Chief, you've made a wrong judgment. Xiao Jianghu quickly said, I have no such intention. Please don't misunderstand Elder Zhang. Zhang Changgong shook his head and continued, To be fair, I do think highly of this Leader Yin, and have some goodwill towards him, but I'm still a member of the League after all. It's thanks to the Qi of Vitality that I can be reborn now. But where did the Qi of Vitality come from? Wasn't it obtained by the League using a large amount of treasured resources? How can I not be clear about this? Xiao Jianghu stood up and bowed slightly to Zhang Changgong, saying seriously, Elder Zhang, you're too kind. Elder Zhang has contributed a lot to the League. No matter how precious the Qi of Vitality is, it's obtained through your actions and merits. I believe that no one in the League will doubt or covet it. Zhang Changgong tilted his body to avoid Xiao Jianghu's bow. This old man is stating my position by stating this point. Now let's talk about this transaction. The League obviously didn't consider the residence of 9 Supremes in this transaction. Perhaps our need is too urgent. This is the truth, an undeniable truth. I believe that Vice Seat Lang has reported Sect Master Yun's intentions clearly. Sect Master Yun's intentions are very clear. That is, even if our alliance has gathered enough resources, we have to delay it as much as possible. We can't let the people in the Spirit's grave think that these things can be easily gathered. Zhang Changgong smiled. An unparalleled expert like him still has the ability to discern the general trend from small details. How often Yin Yang goes in, whether he's relaxed, whether it's difficult, whether each treasure is repeated, whether each piece of metal is related. A lot of things can be deduced from these details. If the experts really judge that Yin Yang actually has the ability to gather the resources he needs in a short period of time, he will definitely increase the demand for the traded resources. When that time comes, not only will it be difficult for Yin Yang to complete this task, it will also indirectly increase the burden on our league, making it harder and harder to sustain. Even if Yin Yang doesn't have the ability to reject us now, even if he has objections, he can only choose to work with us. However, such a quick gain once or twice won't make up for the loss in the long run, and the consequences will be far-reaching. Actually, at the end of the last transaction, Yin Yang has mentioned very seriously that he will try his best to obtain the Qi of Vitality again. Therefore, I believe that Yin Yang will really try his best to obtain the Qi of Vitality this time. After all, this Qi of Vitality is the focus of our league. With this Qi of Vitality, both of us can have a buffer. After all, if he can't get the Qi of Vitality, we'll definitely gather the resources for him to enter again for the sake of the current situation. That is something that Yin Yang really can't stand. Zhang Changgong said. Therefore, I think that there's a high chance that there'll be the Qi of Vitality this time. However, in the future, we must pay more attention to this matter. We can't make such a reckless move that's eager for quick success. Xiao Jianghu nodded seriously and said, Elder Zhang's words are indeed far-sighted and far-sighted. I've learned a lot. The next day, Lang Fantian, Xiao Jianghu, Zhang Changgong, Song Yisan, and Feng Guohai came to the main hall of the residence of 9 Supremes together. The General Commerce League was even more sincere this time. Other than the 5 of them, the other dozen or so people had left the residence of 9 Supremes and gone to the place where Feng Guohai was temporarily stationed. It was an obvious display of great trust. Yin Yang glanced over and squinted his eyes, feeling even more relaxed. This time, the 5 of them came together. Xiao Jianghu walked in the middle beaming. It was obvious that they had decided not to hide it anymore. I hesitated for a long time when I was writing this chapter. There were 2 directions that I could write about the General Commerce League. One was good, and the other was bad. It would be easiest to develop the plot if I wrote about them being bad. On the other hand, if I wrote about them being good, the plot would not develop as quickly, which would be detrimental to the book. In spite of this, I still decided to write about the good side, after a long period of consideration. After all, I've already written about them being loyal, keeping my promise, deep brotherhood. If I were to turn the corner, I would be reluctant to do so. Chapter 10:13. Leader Yin. Xiao Jianghu guffawed. I am the General Commerce League's Xiao Wui. I hereby apologize to Leader Yin. Yin Yang chuckled. Chief, you're being too polite. You have a distinguished identity, so of course you should be careful when you go out. How can you apologize? Wouldn't that be an injustice to a junior like me? Xiao Jianghu. Oh. Xiao Wui guffawed and grabbed Yin Yang's hand, shaking it repeatedly in an extremely friendly manner. He said, however, hiding it from sect leader Yin, it's my fault after all. It's also my lack of sincerity towards my partner. Brother Yin, please don't blame me. This is my fault. Yin Yang did not bother to reply. Xiao Wui was still holding Yin Yang's hand as he said, this reputed one knows that the time between this transaction and the previous one is too short, and the resources I've brought out far exceed Brother Yin's expectations. I'm sorry that I've made things difficult for Brother Yin. This reputed one feels extremely guilty. He continued sincerely. However, the General Commerce League is at a critical juncture now. Our wish of thousands of years might be fulfilled in this Celestial Luck Banner battle. Conquering the upper-class Celestial Luck Banner has always been the common wish of hundreds of thousands of people in the League. It used to be an unattainable dream, but now that it's within reach, I'm really reluctant to let it go. Brother Yin, please don't worry. Whether it's a success or not, it's all up to Brother Yin to decide when to enter the spirit's grave in the future. We won't have any doubts. This is the only time, there's no next time. Yin Yang chuckled bitterly inside. Since Chief has said so, I'll do my best. Let's settle this matter first. Sigh. Towards the end, there was a hint of distress in his sigh. Xiao Wui laughed. Brother Yin is straightforward. With a stretch of his hand, an amethyst box glowing with a warm glow appeared in his palm. Without a word, he shoved it into Yin Yang's palm and said, Brother Yin, this is a Celestial Bear Demon General's core that I obtained by chance back then. It's just that it's been in my hands for a long time, but it's never been put to use. Today, Brother Yin is magnanimous, so I'll give this to Brother Yin as a token of my sincerity. I hope Brother Yin won't reject it. It's light, but it's a token from me. The inner core of a demon general? Behind him, Zhang Changgong, Li Yisan, Lang Fantian, Feng Guohai, and the others were shaken to the core. Demon soldiers, demon guards, and demon generals. Above the demon general was the demon king. The strength of a demon general was similar to that of a human saint. However, if a human saint were to face a demon general head-on, he would definitely lose. This was because the demon race possessed an innate ability that humans did not possess. Once this ability was used, it would at least increase one's strength by more than 20%. How could it be ordinary? As for the inner core of a demon general, it was a rare item that could only be encountered by chance and not sought for. The warriors of the demon race had always been brave. Even if they were not a match for their opponent, they would still self-destruct at the last moment to injure their enemy. They would never attack their opponent for no reason. And this demon Dan was the one in Xiao Wuyi's hand. It could be said that obtaining a monster core was mostly luck. As for obtaining a monster general's monster core, not only did it require a considerable amount of luck, but it also required astonishing strength. This monster core alone could increase a cultivator's cultivation base by hundreds of years. It was an extremely rare item. Now, however, Xiao Wuyi was saying that it could not be used, and was going to be given to Yun Yang. Such a gift was too valuable. How could it be a mere token of his gratitude? Yun Yang was shocked by the turn of events as well. How can I accept this? How can I accept this? Xiao Wuyi slapped the box into Yun Yang's hand without further explanation and feigned anger. If Brother Yun doesn't accept it, it means that you despise the crude gift and look down on my kind intentions. Yun Yang gripped the box of the monster core tightly. This is too embarrassing. This is too. This young brother can only cough accept this. Lang Fantian rolled his eyes while Feng Guohai coughed twice. Zhang Changgong wore a smile on his face, feeling amicable. The chief's trick had always been successful as long as he lowered his pride, no matter which martial artist it was used against. However, it did not seem to be effective against this fellow today. How would they know Yun Yang's background and past? With Yun Yang's temperament, even if the General Commerce League were to be presented to him with both of its hands, he would only reply with, "Ayaya. This is so embarrassing." Yun Yang could not help but sigh. Then he would accept it with a peace of mind. As for being recruited from then on, chief, it's better that you don't think about it. Thinking too much about it will only tire you out and hurt your spirit. However, Great Alliance Master Zhao's apology and gift was more than enough of a gesture. Yun Yang beamed with delight and said, "Chief honored guests, this way please." He gestured for the group to enter the Central Peaks Hall. The 19 children were cultivating diligently in the hall's square, not noticing the arrival of a large group of outsiders. Xiao Wuyi only took a glance at them before turning a blind eye. These children looked like they were talented and could be nurtured, but that was all there was to it. What he didn't know was that these children's natural endowments were still trash a few months ago. Furthermore, there was only one thing on everyone's mind right now: the spirit's grave. This was the most important thing. Everything else was unimportant. Everyone's hearts were filled with longing. Yun Yang accepted the heaven and earth treasures and various exotic metals from Lang Fantian. Although he had mentioned that the sword would be sold at the market price of 900,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces, Yun Yang could not help grumbling when he saw the items in his hands. It's no different from the last time. The last time he received these, it was a pleasant surprise. But this time, it was still the same, which was a little surprising. Many of the resources traded by your league this time are the same as the previous one, Yun Yang said helplessly. Strictly speaking, it's actually very disadvantageous. What do you mean, young brother? Xiao Wuyi asked. Yun Yang said, I know that your league is doing this to maximize the chi of vitality. You've put in a lot of effort, but even if your league is so diligent and the quality of the resources isn't lowered, you're still afraid that the senior inside will be dissatisfied. If the senior were to tell me directly if he has obtained so much in one go, but divided it into 2 exchanges, how do you expect me to tell the difference? Even if I tell the truth, would it be believable? He chuckled bitterly and said, once such a feeling forms, the senior might not be angry, but he'll inevitably hold a grudge. As long as the exchange rules are slightly changed, it'll be a huge problem for both me and the league. Xiao Wuyi was visibly shaken. Brother Yun is right. We've taken it for granted this time. He turned to order. Quickly change a batch. Lang Fantian's face was twisted. This thing, was it really that easy to change a batch of them? Chapter 10:14. I can only trade for a few of the heaven and earth treasures now. I really can't trade for the rest. Lang Fantian pulled a long face. Also, the heaven and earth treasures that I've traded for are much higher than the original ones, be it the market price or the actual price. Yun Yang's eyes shone. If the price is too high, I can reduce it by 1. That's fine. But it can't be repeated. Since there's something new, why don't you bring it out quickly? Lang Fantian was conflicted and worried about the sudden change of events. Initially, The General Commerce Union had prepared a lot of resources this time, but most of them were similar to the few items they had traded previously. Naturally, this was the Commerce Union's intention. Bartering, exchanging similar items for similar items, was the most basic and most accepted method. This was also where the confidence of the Commerce Union that they had the highest chance of obtaining the Chi of Vitality lay. In spite of this, the reality was unusually cruel. The current situation was almost the complete opposite of the prediction. The original plan had become a trap of its own making. Not only could it not achieve the desired effect, but it had also become a hindrance. There were still plenty of heaven and earth treasures left, but a significant portion of them were unique items. Some of them were especially valuable, while others had unique effects to Lang Fantian. He was actually reluctant to trade them away. After all, these treasures each had their own uses, and they were hard to come by again. Even if there was no way to exchange them, it was better to take it slow. As long as the Merchant Union had other heaven and earth treasures, it would be best not to take them out if possible. He did not expect to be called out directly. It was no different from revealing his trump card. Lang Fantian said with a long face, "I only see that they're rare. I don't want to do that." "If that's the case, then please keep her phone. Do that." Yun Yang's eyes darted around as he said, "Vice Chief Lang, the situation now is different from usual. I think it's better for you to take out all the items, and let us discuss the best arrangement. After all, I'm the one who knows the most about the people in the spirit's grave. I really don't want to repeat the trade like today. It's already too many times that things have happened once." The group looked at each other. Although they knew that Yun Yang's words were reasonable, they also knew that the child was making use of this as a pretext to plot against them. Although it is true that you are the only one who understands the preference of the people in the spirit's tomb for trading resources, it is not like we have no basis to judge. We are just listening to you. Take them all out. If I really took them all out, wouldn't you have the final say? It was said that one should not flaunt one's wealth, but, at this moment, even Xiao Wui couldn't make a decision. Yin Yang smiled and said, "We've had several transactions and we've had a pleasant cooperation, each benefiting from the other. I believe that your league doesn't intend to stop with these few transactions, does it? Even if there are rare treasures, they will only be used as bargaining chips in future transactions. As for the grade of the treasures that the spirit's tomb will give in return, it's obvious from low to high. Whether we should complete the transaction as soon as possible, or leave it for the future depends on the person's opinion. However, I still feel that the precious treasures might not be suitable for what we urgently need at the moment. So, the Alliance should make a decision on how to choose between them and what we urgently need at the moment. I'm just talking about the Vitality Chi. Does your Alliance really only need it once?" Yin Yang said faintly. "There's also the Chi of Tao, the Chi of Heaven's Way, the Chi of Soul. Doesn't your league need all of these things? If your league still has the intention of obtaining these things, I'm more inclined to be honest with you about the superior treasures you possess. It's more appropriate to sort out the resources as soon as possible. I don't want to experience a situation where both sides lose more than they gain because of a mistake in a certain segment. What's more, a momentary stinginess might cause us to pay a greater price in the future. Who knows?" He smiled and said, "An unparalleled expert who's like a legend. It goes without saying that his experience and knowledge are superior to ours. If the senior inside feels that we're playing tricks, everyone may think that I'm coveting your league's precious resources. I don't deny this, it's indeed my intention. However, while my starting point is for my own benefit, I'm also considering the league's loss. This bit of sincerity is as clear as the sun and the moon. After all is said and done, it's still up to the seniors to decide what to do. If you don't want to do so, or if you're hesitant, it's fine to exchange like this time." Yin Yang smiled faintly and said, "Actually, it doesn't matter too much to me." Xiao Wui and Lang Fantian looked at each other speechless. It seemed like what Yin Yang said was reasonable. Although keeping these superior grade heaven and earth treasures might have other uses in the future, they were insignificant compared to the Chi of Vitality, the Chi of the Great Path, and even the primordial violet Chi. It went without saying which was better. If so, these things would have to be handed over to Yunyang sooner or later. It was at most a matter of time. Xiao Wui frowned and said, Fantian, just hand all the resources we've brought this time to Brother Yin. It's only a matter of time anyway. We don't have to go through the trouble of appraising them again and again. Lang Fantian sighed. All right. He still passed the spatial ring over rather reluctantly and said, The others are fine, but there's a stock of spiritual jade snow ginseng that's 150,000 years old and has already developed spirituality. There are also 2 stalks of phantom ginseng that are 80,000 years old and 3 to 4 stalks of frozen jade lotus that are 27,000 years old. These are all superior spiritual herbs that can only be encountered by luck. Xiao Wui's face could not help twitching as well. He could not help glancing at Lang Fantian and saying, I didn't know that you've really brought all our assets here. Even with Xiao Wui's composure, he could not help feeling a little heartache. Once these items were exchanged, it would be extremely difficult to come across another stock. Perhaps there might not even be a second chance in this lifetime. If the League really can't bear to part with them, or if you're hesitant, it's fine to take them back. After all, this isn't the only time we've traded. He smiled faintly and said, Like what the League has said, it's only a matter of time. As long as it's useful, it's not a waste. Xiao Wui and Lang Fantian were rendered speechless by his words. That was right. No matter how precious the spiritual herb was, it was futile if it could not be put to use. What was the use of keeping it? It was better to trade it away as soon as possible. Out of sight, out of mind. Fantian, hand all the resources to Brother Yin. Ask Brother Yin to allocate them. Roughly how many times do you think these resources can be traded? Xiao Wui decided decisively. Chapter 10:15. Yunyang looked at the heaven and earth treasures and the piles of strange metals in the spatial ring in his palm. His expression was nonchalant. Even his gaze was nonchalant, but he was inwardly overjoyed. Although Yunyang was limited by his understanding of this realm and did not know the details of the resources he had obtained, it did not stop him from knowing that everything in the spatial ring was good stuff. So much good stuff. In fact, Yunyang was not the only one who was overjoyed. There were others who were even more exaggerated. Ha ha ha. Aya 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 aya. Emmy cried in the spatial ring the moment Yunyang held it in his hand. It was unusually hasty. There were so many good stuff. Give it to me, give it to me. Calculate the price first. Yunyang poured out the heaven and earth treasures in the ring, filling up the pile. As a junior, I don't know much about this. Elder Feng, please. You can offer a higher price, don't be shy. The corners of Feng Guohai's lips were twitching in pain. These are all heaven and earth treasures. Brother Feng, why did you pour them out so recklessly? You have to handle them with care so that the quality won't be damaged. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't have the intention to do so when I saw such a big pile. People say that the rarer something is, the greater its value. It's my fault. Yunyang guffawed. Although he said no, there was not the slightest hint of apology in his expression. The faces of the Merchant League's people were all twisted. To a junior like Yunyang, it was understandable that he did not know how to place a bunch of heaven and earth treasures, that he did not know what they were. But how could he say that the rarer something was, the greater its value? He was truly a child who did not know what was important. What they did not know was that Yunyang was actually fine. It would be fine even if it was smashed. Even if it was broken or rotten, Emmy could heal it instantly without any difficulty. Yunyang's thirst for heaven and earth treasures lay more in obtaining a mother stock. As long as he had the first stock, Emmy would naturally be able to produce more. The rarer something was, the greater its value would be, and the subsequent stocks would not be valuable. A cheat spirit with a cheat was so domineering and arrogant. But this confidence was not enough for outsiders to know. The heavenly treasures in this transaction are worth at least 5 million upper-grade spiritual jades, while the exotic metals are worth 2 million upper-grade spiritual jades. The final result of the appraisal was not the slightest bit discounted. It was an astronomical figure. 7 million high-grade spirit jades. 70 billion low-grade spiritual jades. Feng Guohai said. 150,000 years old spiritual jade snow ginsengs, Starting bid alone would be 2 million upper-class spiritual jade pieces in an auction. 3 million per stock is really the bottom line. As he spoke, he sighed. Yin Yang had no objections to the price. Everything else aside, just the 4 words of 150,000 years was already an extremely rare and precious heretical existence. All right, let's go with the price that Elder Feng mentioned. According to the previous exchange rate, the resources we have here are enough to exchange for 7 times. Yin Yang showed off his ability to calculate and changed the topic immediately. However, there's something that I have to say first. The exchange rate for resources worth 1 million is based on the previous transaction. I can't be sure that the exchange rate given by the Spirit's Grave Senior is as such. I can only guarantee that I'll try my best to persuade him after we enter, and try my best to obtain at least 1 stream of Qi of Vitality. I really can't guarantee anything more than that. Besides, and most importantly, even if the exchange rate of 1 million upper-class spiritual jade pieces is confirmed, there are still 6 more chances to exchange besides today's. We can only do it after some time. We can't do it again in the near future. I understand. Please do your best, Brother Yin. The League is grateful for Brother Yin's kindness. Xiao Wei stared at the spiritual jade snow ginseng reluctantly, his expression pained. Sigh. Let's discuss the distribution plan. Let's start soon. I've been very busy lately. Yin Yang took out some of his resources without hesitation. Mixing the resources from both sides, they were swiftly divided into 7 piles, as Feng Guohai, and the rest worked together. The other 6 piles were roughly the same in value. Only the spiritual jade snow ginseng was left alone. After all, the ginseng was valued at 3 million spiritual jade pieces. It was impossible for it to be less. Yin Yang knew when to stop. He took out 7 spatial rings, 1 for each pile, and kept them all. I plan to only bring the spiritual jade snow ginseng in this time. Yin Yang thought about it and said faintly, bring another 50,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces for the rest. I won't bring any other spiritual materials or mystical metals. Xiao Wei and the others cheered in unison. Good idea. Yin Yang said with a chuckle. I've always believed in Elder Feng's valuation. Since the spiritual jade snow ginseng can be valued at least 3 million upper-class spiritual jade pieces, it should be meaningful to the senior in the spirit's grave. At least compared to the last transaction, it's at least 3 times more. I believe the spirit's grave senior won't be stingy on this, and will only give more in return. Although we've taken the initiative to meet in a short period of time this time, it depends on what we say and what we do. As long as I enter with rare treasures, it doesn't look like I've purposely divided the treasures in my hands twice. It's just luck. Or perhaps, I've thought of the spirit's grave the moment I got the treasures and handed them over to the senior. I believe everyone can understand the difference. Yin Yang looked shy, but he was actually very cunning. Everyone present guessed that Yin Yang must have something else to say, so they waited quietly. Yin Yang paused and said, I believe this way, we can get the most of the treasures we need. I think this should be the most confident strategy to obtain the Qi of Vitality. It's even reasonable to get more benefits. What do you all think? It's a brilliant plan indeed. Everyone praised in unison. If that's the case, please wait for a moment. I'll get to work now. Yin Yang then walked into the meditation room next to him. Xiao Wei sat with his legs crossed, his expression impassive, as if he was meditating. Lang Fantian quickly reminded him, Boss, don't use your deific consciousness to probe. Xiao Wei coughed and said awkwardly, How did you know? Lang Fantian Feng Guohai. And the others looked terrified. We've tried, but it's suicide. As the group conversed, although they did not use their deific consciousness to probe, they could still sense that Yin Yang, who was in the meditation room, had disappeared without a trace due to their martial instincts. It was as if he no longer existed in this world. Xiao Wei was aware of this, but when he experienced it at such a close distance he was still shocked. His indifference earlier was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 10:16. A moment later, a rather heavy panting could be heard from inside. Everyone knew at once that Yin Yang had returned. This is too convenient, Xiao Wei exclaimed. The world is vast and full of wonders indeed. How can one believe such an opportunity if they don't experience it themselves? Yin Yang was already walking out with a grin. How is it? Xiao Wui and Lang Fantian spoke at the same time. Song Changgong's gaze was especially passionate. Li Yisan, who stood beside him, looked indifferent, but her hands could not help clenching into fists. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. It's a success. Yin Yang laughed. He carefully used his left hand to point at his right hand, and then used his right hand to point at his left hand. He chuckled again, full of self-satisfaction and high spirits. Ha ha ha. Xiao Wui was relieved and guffawed. Brother Yin is a lucky general indeed. Your wishes come true. After entering this time, the process was smoother than expected. The spirit's grave senior was very satisfied with the spiritual jade snow ginseng. He said that it had reached the lower class, and could even be considered for nurturing a medicinal spirit. He was very pleased. Because of this, I boldly suggested that the spiritual jade snow ginseng was given out due to fate and coincidence. But more importantly, there was a reason for it. A senior urgently needed the chi of vitality. That's why he offered the spiritual jade snow ginseng in exchange. He said with a grin. Guess what's the result? Everyone did not respond. Instead, they all smiled knowingly. They thought, if it's not a good result, why do you have to keep us guessing? However, since the other party had kept them guessing, as a sensible partner, they had to suck up to him. Otherwise, how could they proceed? Nonetheless, they were all people of high status. Feng Guohai's position was the lowest among the Commerce League's people. Seeing that no one was responding, he could only pinch his nose and play the part. What's the result? Yin Yang chuckled. Senior agreed without hesitation. How generous and magnanimous of you. The group was exasperated. This result was really unexpected, damn it. Senior has given me 10 pieces of ethereal amethysts for this exchange. With a wave of his hand, 10 pieces of ethereal amethysts appeared on the table. The purple chi was glistening and illuminated the whole room. The spiritual chi in the room suddenly became twice as dense. Everyone instinctively swallowed their saliva. While the ethereal amethyst was not considered a rare item in the residence of 9 Supremes, it was still an extremely rare item in the outside world. There was a demand for it, but there was no market for it. The appearance of these 10 ethereal amethysts in one go was enough to tug at the heartstrings of more than 80% of the cultivators in this world. The second reward I received this time is naturally the life chi. Other than that, there's a third type. Yin Yang grinned. Before Feng Guohai could initiate the conversation, Lang Fantian was the first to ask. The third? There's actually a third type? Yin Yang chuckled. The truth is as we expected. Senior is very satisfied with the spiritual jade snow ginseng. He even felt that the age of the spiritual jade snow ginseng is beyond his expectations. With my current ability, there's no way I could have gotten it, but I did. That's why he gave me an extra reward. Senior, you're a generous man indeed. Lang Fantian looked reverent. According to what Senior has said, the third reward is probably more valuable than the chi of vitality. However, I won't say much about it, Chief. You can deal with it as you see fit, Yin Yang said with a grin. What is it? Xiao Wui said generously. We're all brothers here. There's nothing to hide. Brother Yin, please elaborate. Lang Fantian and the others looked touched. In spite of this, Xiao Wui immediately felt a great deal of regret for what he had said to buy their hearts. Since you're so loyal, Chief, I won't be a despicable person in vain. Everything is your league's reward for the trade. The third item for exchange is a wisp of Qi of Tao. Other than the origin of the Qi of Tao, this wisp of Qi of Tao also contains the comprehension of the Qi of Tao. Whether the final result is big or small, more or less depends on the individual's fate. Once the words were spoken, the place fell silent. The 5 people's eyes widened at the same time. Xiao Wui's mouth was agape, but there was only one regrettable thought in his mind: to slap himself hard on the mouth. This was what he deserved. The Qi of the Great Path, the dream treasure that all martial artists yearned for. The Qi of the Great Path. There was only a wisp of it. Yet it was exposed to the eyes of the 5 people present. What was worse was that the item was in Yin Yang's arm, It had to be unsealed now to comprehend and absorb the qi of Tao. To whom? Who else could it not be? Only one among the 5 of them could benefit from it. The rest would all be lost. Song Changgong coughed and was the first to speak. Alliance leader, you promised to give the qi of vitality to Exian. This is already a great gift. The 2 of us have no right to covet the qi of Tao anymore. However, allow me to take advantage of my seniority and say this. Other than the alliance leader, no one else is suitable to receive the qi of Tao. Feng Guohai knew that he was not qualified to compete, so he agreed readily. Yes, yes. Lang Fontain's face was flushed as he stammered and said, yes, yes. Other than Big Brother, I'll fight whoever dares to spy on it. Xiao Wui's face was flushed as well. He coughed and said after some time, if so, I shall be shameless. If Brother Yun has more qi of Tao to exchange in the future, all of you will have priority. It was not that Xiao Wui did not want to be courteous. However, he knew very well that this was not the time to be courteous. What if another shameless character like Yin Yang appeared? What should they do then? For example, he could say, Elder Song has the highest cultivation base among all of us here. He has regained his youth, and his state of mind is even clearer. I think Elder Song is more suitable than me. As soon as he said this, Song Changgong immediately replied, since the alliance leader has said so, I have no choice but to accept. From now on, I will do my utmost for the alliance until the day I die. Then, he would be in deep sh*t. Although the possibility was low, Xiao Wui dared not take the risk as long as there was a slim chance. At a time like this, the chief's magnanimity and generosity could all be put aside. Since Xiao Wui had said so, the others did not say anything else, but the atmosphere was much more serious than before. Xiao Wui's thoughts raced, and he sighed helplessly in his heart. He knew that his carelessness today, thinking that he was being magnanimous, had instead trapped himself in a trap of his own making, causing a small knot between him and his old brothers. He knew that he had to resolve it when he returned, but he had no idea how to resolve it. I'll go back tomorrow after I'm done. There might not be any updates tomorrow. I'm here this time to participate in an activity and to accompany my wife for a checkup. After the checkup, the results were out. It was a benign tumor, so I could rest easy and tell others about it. I'll have to undergo surgery immediately after I return, but it'll be dragged on for another week or so because of my period. I'll try to save as much as I can during this period. It can't be helped if I can't save it by then. I won't have time after my wife's surgery anyway. Please forgive me if I can't save it by then. Chapter 10:17. Elderly, Xiao Wui said with a smile. Take this qi of vitality quickly. The General Commerce League. We're counting on Elder Zhang, an elderly for the promotion battle of the Celestial Luck Banner. Li Yisan smiled faintly. Don't worry, Chief. This old man will do his best for the General Commerce League's cause. I'll spare no effort. Under everyone's gaze, Li Yisan undid the seal on Yin Yang's arm and absorbed the qi of vitality. Then, with a wave of his hand, Song Changgong brought Li Yisan into the meditation room. Chief, us brothers will take our leave first to recuperate in peace. Very well. What came next was the highlight of the event, Xiao Wui collecting the qi of Tao. The qi of Tao had always been something that could be encountered, but not found in legends. Even if one was fated to encounter it, the final outcome would be as Yin Yang had said. The comprehension varied from person to person. It could be greater or lesser, more or less, but one thing was certain. There would definitely be benefits. Lang Fantian stood guard by the side, fully focused. His eyes did not blink, and his body was so tense that it was about to explode. Lang Fantian's action was to observe from the side, and observe the effect of the qi of Tao. Secondly, it was to guard Xiao Wui. There could not be even the slightest bit of negligence at a time like this. Once he was disturbed, Xiao Wui might very well go berserk. After all, it was the legendary qi of Tao entering one's body. One could not afford to be careless. At least, from Lang Fontain's perspective, the General Commerce League had gained a great advantage in this transaction. The qi of Tao was already a dreamy treasure that could not be measured by wealth. If one were to set a price, even if all the treasures of heaven and earth that the General Commerce League had collected this time were added up, it would only be around 7 million upper-class spiritual jade pieces. It was an astronomical figure, but could it be used to purchase a ray of Qi of Tao? It would still be a joke. This was because the Qi of Tao had always represented resources, but opportunities. It was an opportunity that could not be obtained without a great deal of luck. Now, the General Commerce League had obtained it in a way that was no different from a transaction. It was indeed a great opportunity. Brother Yin, I will remember your noble character and unquestionable integrity. Lang Fontain's gaze towards Yun Yang was filled with sincerity. Everything else aside, if Yun Yang were to say that he had only gotten 2 items in the exchange this time, outsiders would not be able to find out. After all, as long as the Qi of Vitality was obtained, the Merchant Union would acknowledge it. Who would have thought that there would be a third feedback, let alone that the third feedback was the Qi of the Great Path? Therefore, Yun Yang's act of concealing the Qi of Tao was an easy task, without any repercussions. However, Yun Yang did not do so. This was enough to show his sincerity. In the true sense of the word, he was of noble character and unquestionable integrity, with an open heart. At the very least, Lang Fantian knew that if he were in Yun Yang's shoes, he would most likely take the Qi of Tao for himself. At most, he would compensate the League after he had achieved success in his cultivation. Big Brother Lang, you're too polite. As the saying goes, the heavens are watching. If it's yours, it should be yours. Yun Yang smiled and said, besides, the senior inside also said that he would give me a chance to obtain the Qi of Tao in the future. So Brother Lang, don't think too highly of me. Lang Fantian was extremely envious. Brother Yun, you're really lucky. Yun Yang chuckled looking at Lang Fantian, and suddenly spoke telepathically, Vice Chief Lang, if there's a chance in the future, I'll think of a way to get you a share as well. Lang Fantian plopped onto the ground, his mouth agape. His face turned purplish-red at a speed visible to the naked eye, his lips quivering. Feng Guohai was shocked. What was going on? Could it be that the vice chief who was guarding him had already suffered a backlash before the chief who was absorbing the Qi of Tao had gone berserk? Otherwise, how could there be such a sign? Really? Lang Fantian blurted out uncontrollably, his voice quivering. Once he said it, however, he wanted to smash his own mouth completely. King Hell. Yun Yang had said it telepathically. What a secret it was. How could a third party know about it? What should he do now that he had asked the question? It would definitely arouse suspicion. As long as Feng Guohai uttered another word and stirred up suspicion, he would not be able to explain himself no matter how many mouths he had. That was the Qi of Tao. How could it be compared to ordinary items? Yun Yang said faintly, I never lie. That senior has indeed said that if I can get another heaven and earth treasure of the same level as the spiritual jade snow ginseng, he'll have the Qi of Tao as a gift. Even more precious items might be possible. Lang Fantian was relieved at once, and looked at Yun Yang gratefully, saying, the League will do its best. Yun Yang chuckled. I've witnessed your League's sincerity time and again. We'll definitely have a pleasant collaboration, and a seamless understanding. Lang Fantian spoke from the bottom of his heart. Of course. Of course. His purplish-red face did not go down for a long time. A while later, Xiao Wui finally woke up from his meditation. He looked like he had just woken up from a dream, his face filled with confusion and uncertainty. Big brother, how is it? Lang Fantian asked. Extensive and profound. Xiao Wui's eyes glinted. The legendary Qi of Tao lives up to its name indeed. The Qi of Tao is vast and boundless. It can't be comprehended in a day. I'm afraid I'll need at least a few years to finish comprehending it. He stood up and suddenly bowed deeply at Yun Yang, saying solemnly, Brother Yun, I can't thank you enough for your kindness. I, Xiao Wui, will never forget this. Yun Yang replied faintly, You're too kind, Chief. This belongs to all of you. I'm only a middleman. I'll only take what I can modify, so that I won't feel guilty. Xiao Wui chuckled, suppressing the excitement within him, and said, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. He handed over a spatial ring and said, Brother Yin, there are 1 million upper-class spiritual jade pieces in here. It's not to repay you, but Brother Yin, you must need a lot of money when you've just started your sect. I've felt that we're kindred spirits the moment I saw you this time. This amount is just a small gift to congratulate you on founding your sect, a token of my sincerity. If you still think highly of me, don't say anything more. 1,000,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces had actually been reduced to a small gift, a token of my sincerity. Yin Yang reached out to receive it, looking ashamed as he said, "Cough, cough, this is really quite embarrassing." Xiao Wui laughed, not at all offended. Instead, he heaved a sigh of relief. The matter this time was related to the Qi of Tao. The karma involved was immense. If he could use 1,000,000 spiritual jade pieces to erase this karma, Xiao Wui would be more than happy to see it. In the meditation room, the white fog dissipated. 2 handsome middle-aged men walked out, shoulder to shoulder. Both of them were tall and handsome, and their movements were filled with graceful bearing and dignified bearing. Song Changgong Li Yisan, Heaven Sword and Earth Saber. Both of their faces were still filled with excitement, inexplicably emotional. The crowd congratulated them in unison. "I'm home. It's been a few months. It's been a few months. My wife has been feeling a slight pain in her chest. A local check says it's mammary gland hyperplasia, but it's not a big deal. She's taken a lot of medicine, but it doesn't work. So she went to Jinan for a check, and it says there's a big nodule. So she went to Shanghai for a check, then to Beijing. It's confirmed. It's not a simple mammary gland hyperplasia. Sigh, maybe it's caused by mammary gland hyperplasia, but I don't want to talk. I want to rush to the local hospital and beat someone up. The doctor said it's benign, but it needs to be removed as soon as possible. Otherwise, there's a possibility of cancer even if it's 1 grade bigger." Chapter 10:18. On the same afternoon, the General Commerce League left the residence of 9 Supremes. Before they parted, Yin Yang reminded in a low voice, "Chief Xiao, the cooperation between your league and us must be kept a secret. Nothing must be leaked." Xiao Wui's eyes glinted as he replied, "Don't worry, brother. The league will keep this a secret." Yin Yang said, "What I mean is it's best that the people from the General Commerce League who come in the future are fixed. You must know that there have been too many people coming and going these few times. I'm worried about this. The General Commerce League is one of the few great forces in this world, but the residence of 9 Supremes is only newly established and doesn't even have a lower-class celestial luck banner." Xiao Wui nodded heavily. Yin Yang's worry was actually what Xiao Wui was worried about. He took in a deep breath and replied solemnly, "Don't worry, brother. Leave this matter to me." Watching the General Commerce League leave reluctantly, Yin Yang finally breathed a sigh of relief. Just as he returned to the mountain, he entered his deific consciousness space impatiently. "Emmy, how's the harvest this time?" "Ayayayaya." Emmy was so excited that it could barely contain itself. How was the harvest this time? Was there a need to ask? The abundance of heaven and earth resources had doubled the density of Emmy's leaves, and beneath each leaf were stipule leaves the size of a finger. This was a super growth after a great nourishment. Emmy happily introduced it to Yin Yang. When Yin Yang heard it, he was overjoyed. The state of stipule leaves. This was probably the embryonic form of Emmy's complete state. With the support of stipule leaves, other than the leaves being sturdier and its air of vitality being doubled, the stipule would not grow too big, but it was the best aid in unleashing Emmy's mystical psionic power. As long as the stipule continued to grow to the size of a palm, and the thickness of the leaves reached a certain thickness, it would mean that Emmy's leaves had reached the level of mastery. By then, the power that Emmy could unleash would no longer be limited to the Qi of vitality and the Qi of Tao. Even the exceptionally rare primordial purple Qi that took months to grow would become easily obtainable. By then, Emmy would be able to produce hundreds of primordial purple Qi in a day. And this was under the current situation of these few leaves. If there were new leaves, it would be even more terrifying. Yes, it was that exaggerated and appalling. This was not even the limit. As Yin Yang's cultivation base continued to grow, and he continued to absorb the air of karma, when Emmy grew 8 leaves and all 8 stipules had grown to a perfect state, his deific consciousness space could undergo a qualitative change and turn into a primordial space. Deific, 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 deific. Deific, 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 deific. When Yin Yang calmed down and took a closer look, he realized that his gains this time were not just limited to this. Surprises came one after another. It was no longer beyond expectations but beyond imagination. Emmy displayed its prowess, swiftly understanding the medicinal properties of all the heaven and earth treasures it had obtained. It had dissected a portion of the seeds and planted them in its deific consciousness space, filling the space with fields of spiritual herbs. As far as Yin Yang's deific consciousness could see, there were no less than a dozen herb fields nearby, filled with lush, vibrant seedlings. Although they were seedlings, their growth was rapid, almost visible to the naked eye. In the distance there were flat lands that had been cleared. Every once in a while, a sprout would pop out with a bayou sound, shaking its head and brimming with vitality. There was no need to worry that the new seedlings would fight each other for nutrients, because the distance between each seedling was the same. Even if one were to measure it with a ruler, there would probably not be the slightest error. There were hundreds of spiritual plants planted in the deific consciousness space, each one of them rare in the outside world. Although they were still seedlings and could not be used, Yin Yang believed that these spiritual plants would grow rapidly under Emmy's care. It would not be too far away in the near future. When Yin Yang's gaze swept across the edge, he found a vine-like spiritual plant there. It had already crawled more than 100 feet into the air, its leaves dotting the surface of the vine. It was the celestial cotton vine, a unique spiritual plant that Emmy had spent quite a bit of effort to save. It was the celestial cotton iron that had been removed from Dong Qitian's body. Seeing that Yin Yang was paying attention to the celestial cotton vine, Emmy cried out proudly. The vine swayed in the air and pointed at the elixir field from afar, as if they had a great sense of achievement. Its meaning was obvious. As long as I'm here, all of these will be no problem. They'll all be done very, very quickly. Yin Yang's delight grew. He could not help but smile. Looking at the spiritual plants that he had harvested along the way, many of them had been here for a long time, and had long regained their vitality, brimming with life. Only a dozen or so of them that had just come and looked a little wilted. The one that had suffered the most damage was the spiritual jade snow ginseng, that had lived for 150,000 years. A part of its life force had probably been sucked away, causing it to look listless, like it could die at any time. As Emmy flung a gust of qi of Tao over, the spiritual jade snow ginseng pulled itself out from the ground and swallowed the qi of Tao hastily. Its branches and leaves swayed for a while, as if it was extremely satisfied. A moment later, it landed on the ground and swayed its roots again, planting itself back into the ground. The corners of Yin Yang's lips twitched as he watched. Was this a medicinal herb? Was it a plant? Why was it so lively, so human-like? Looking at the other side, there were all sorts of meteorites and strange metals gathered together, but most of them had already turned into powder. Emmy had covered the area with another large leaf. The process was basically a piece of emerald green leaf, wrapping a piece of metal. Then the leaf folded up. Poof! When the leaf opened up again, other than countless pieces of powder that fell, there was only a small piece of the original metal, that was about 1/100th of its original volume. The rest of the metal had evaporated like ice cubes. Yin Yang realized that there were already no less than thousands of small pieces of metal in this area, all of them glowing with a strange brilliance. It was the most essential part of these metals. However, it was obvious that Emmy was not very proactive in its work on the mystical metals and meteorites. It seemed to be slacking off. At least, it was not as attentive to the spiritual herbs and spiritual plants. Only a single leaf was left hanging here, moving only after a long time, looking lethargic. No matter what, there was still a considerable stock of the mystical metals here. Yin Yang was very satisfied. Emmy, hurry up and do something with the mystical metals. Yin Yang urged. If you continue at this speed, when will you be able to forge the exclusive series of divine weapons of the residents of 9 Supremes? Chapter 10:19. When Emmy cultivated the spiritual herbs of the heaven and earth, they could feed the qi of spiritual energy back to Emmy, which was greatly beneficial to it. However, fiddling with the metals, it was purely manual labor with no benefits to speak of. It would be a miracle if it could raise Emmy's interest. Emmy, think about it this way. The more diligent you are, the more essence of the mystical metals you can produce. The more good stuff there is, the more heaven and earth treasures I can exchange for. Yun-Yang said patiently. Yun-Yang said patiently, look, if you move a little and create a supreme treasured saber, I can guarantee that our heaven and earth resources will increase by at least 10 more. Huh? Emmy was confused. It did not know how a saber could be exchanged for 10 heaven and earth treasures. What was this? Maybe it's more than 10. Yun-Yang nodded and promised solemnly. It's not impossible even if it's 20 to 30. Emmy was still confused, but it was obviously energized. The process was meaningless to Emmy, as long as there was a result. Yun-Yang would not deceive it with his own interests. Emmy had always been confident about this. Look, these heaven and earth treasures that you've cultivated, although they have a bright future, they can't be of much use now. They're all not mature yet, so their effects are very limited. Yun-Yang increased the intensity of his bewitchment. Exchanging them for fresh, high-class items is the right thing to do. You only need to put in a little more effort and come up with a few treasured sabers and swords to sell, and you'll be able to wait for an endless supply of heaven and earth resources. Emmy was convinced by Yun-Yang without surprise. The next moment, crack. A piece of metal was refined. Crack. Another piece. Crack, crack, crack. A few white geese and Gigi were chasing around the medicinal field in the space, circling around Yun-Yang from time to time, meowing. Although there were no other living beings here other than the few of them, it was rather lonely and boring. However, the spiritual chi was unprecedentedly abundant. To Whitey Haw, having a sufficient spiritual aura was the most important thing. Whether it was mystical beasts, spiritual beasts, or mystical beasts, strength was always their top priority. This was why when Yun-Yang came to the deific consciousness space, they would come to their master to have fun and show their faces. 90% of the time, they would cultivate diligently on their own. Seeing that Emmy was concentrating on its work, Yun-Yang shifted his attention to the few white geese. The 4 white geese looked the same as before, still looking like pom-poms. Only Whitey 5 had changed a lot. Not only did it grow a lot bigger, its movement speed was also significantly slower than the 4 white geese. The natural advantages and disadvantages of different races were vividly displayed here. On the other hand, Jiaoji was still as ugly as ever. There were only a few feathers on its bald wings. Its 2 thin legs were still like a white chicken. There were 3 bald feathers on its head, and only 1 feather on its butt. It was already so ugly that it made people's hair stand on end, but the feather on its butt kept moving up and down, left and right. It was really. Yin-Yang rolled his eyes. What kind of race was this fellow? Even with the spiritual chi in the deific consciousness space, it had only grown less than 10 feathers on its bald body after such a long period of time. He really did not know what was going on. But it couldn't be that crow. Say, what kind of creature are you? Yin-Yang stroked the 3 feathers on Jiaoji's head and murmured, could it really be a pure-blooded phoenix? But if it was a pure-blooded phoenix, it wouldn't be so bald after so long like you. Jiao jiao jiao. Jiaoji chirped excitedly, flapping its wings and rubbing itself against Yun-Yang. Its sharp beak pecked Yun-Yang twice. Plop, plop. 2 small holes appeared on Yun-Yang's clothes at once. The corners of Yun-Yang's lips twitched again as he looked at his clothes. Our clothes are made of ice silk, okay? Ice silk was the silk spun by a 10,000-year-old ice silkworm. It had a unique texture and was exceptionally flexible. Not only was it difficult to be damaged by sabers and swords, it was also good at dissipating attacks. Clothes made of ice silk could not only withstand attacks, but it could also deflect incoming weapons. Why was it that this fellow's sharp beak had actually pecked 2 holes on it like it was eating a fruit? What was this beak made of? Well, this was actually a good thing. It had such a strong offensive power even before it had grown. So it must be extraordinary. Yin-Yang could only comfort himself this way. However, Yin-Yang's original speculation about what this little thing was overturned. What kind of species was it? Yun Yang had a feeling that it was not as simple as the four words Phoenix bloodline. However, there were demons in the bound of universe. He would think of a way to ask about it when he met them. After giving Emmy his task, Yun Yang did not stay any longer and left the deific consciousness space. After all, he still had 19 disciples waiting to be trained outside. On the way away from the residence of 9 Supremes, Xiaowui looked unprecedentedly excited. His square face was filled with uncontrollable pride. For the chief of Commerce League, who had always been composed and rarely showed emotion, it was rare to see such emotions on the surface. In spite of this, the few people who followed him did not feel surprised or surprised. After all, Xiaowui had obtained a wisp of Qi of Dao this time. This was definitely a windfall. With the support of the Qi of Dao, Xiaowui's cultivation progress in the future could almost be foreseen. When he fully comprehended it, his cultivation base would soar to an unimaginable height. Lang Fontain's expression was nonchalant, but he was actually thinking of something else. It was not about Xiaowui or the Commerce League but about himself. Yin Yang's words echoed in his mind. Vice Chief Lang, I'll get you a strand of it when I have the chance. Song Changgong and Li Yisan flew side by side. Their expressions did not change, but they were secretly communicating with each other through voice transmission. Yisan, what do you think of the residence of 9 Supremes? It's extraordinary. Have you noticed their disciples? Of course I have. You've helped me nurse my body during the time we've been here. Perhaps you haven't had the time to attend to other things, but I've noticed it all. Chief, they haven't been here for long, so they haven't noticed it. However, I've seen it all. Me too. I really want to find 2 heirs from here. These young fellows are like emeralds hidden within rocks, peerless jades. They're being slowly peeled away by the residents of 9 Supremes. Sigh. I really don't know how the residents of 9 Supremes selects the so-called geniuses from the crowd, leaving only the gold buried in the sand. The residence of 9 Supremes isn't as simple as it looks, Song Changgong said faintly. I suspect that they have their own, unique method of honing the bones and extracting the marrow. Chapter 1020. Li Yisan pondered with a frown. Oh, I didn't sense anything like that. Have you found the source? Song Changgong chuckled dryly. I wouldn't be so surprised if I could confirm it. I've probed many times, but I didn't find anything. Do you know what this means? Li Yisan was taken aback and said in surprise. I've only recovered today. My senses were lacking before, so it's not surprising that I didn't notice anything. If you really have such a feeling, doesn't that mean there's a pinnacle martial artist in the residence of 9 Supremes? Song Changgong nodded. Not only that, it's a pinnacle expert who's a few realms higher than you and I. Li Yisan said calmly. That's good. We brothers not only owe the Commerce League, but also the residents of 9 Supremes. Not only will the League be in trouble in the future, we'll die for it. If the 9 Supremes are in trouble, we'll go through mountains of blades and oceans of fire, never tired. With such an expert in the residence of 9 Supremes, we'll definitely be able to go further. We'll have a chance to repay him. I think so too, Song Changgong said with a chuckle. Let's go. Let's hope Chief League Leader doesn't change his mind after obtaining the Qi of Dao this time. Otherwise, even if you and I recover, we'll still be a drop in the bucket compared to the world's heroes. It doesn't matter. We'll pick them up every day anyway. It's all cheap. It doesn't matter even if we lose them. Ha ha. Ha ha ha. Just like that, he flew for another few dozen li. Song Changgong suddenly said. I think that once the residence of 9 Supremes grows, it might really be able to shake the bound of universe. I have this feeling. Remember to stifle this feeling in your belly. Don't ever say it aloud. Li Yisan smiled faintly. Let's go. Right, there's a question I've been holding back for a few days. Now that we're young again, full of energy and vigor, have you ever thought about? What? Watch them grow old again. Watch them die. Watch them leave one by one. Watch them stay empty for a few thousand years. Song Changgong heaved a long sigh. Neither of them spoke after that. They hurried on their journey together. Yin Yang's deific consciousness scanned the square in front of the hall, taking in the cultivation of the 19 children in an instant. Yin Yang guided them, according to their individual levels, before he continued to wander around the 9 peaks. Now that the matter of the General Commerce Alliance had come to an end, there was still some time before the battle of the battle of the battle of the battle of the celestial flags. Other than guiding the disciples, he could only wander around to relax. Then, he naturally continued to practice and rest, waiting for the special training at night. The place where Yun Yang, Shi Wuchen, and the others trained was naturally not the same as where the disciples trained. It was a place that the children could not come into contact with. After a round of inspection, Yun Yang was pleasantly surprised to find that each disciple of the 9 peaks had a few outstanding talents. They were willing to work hard, smart, eager to learn, determined and resilient. This discovery comforted Yun Yang. He felt that with these seeds, the rise of the residents of 9 Supremes was only a matter of time. They arrived at the last mountain peak. Yun Yang noticed 2 disciples who stood out from the crowd. They were a boy of 13 or 14 years old, and a girl of 11 or 12 years old. The little boy was dressed in white. He was not very tall, but he was tall and straight. His face was full of determination. The little girl looked weak, and even had a strong childish air. However, from their appearance, these 2 children did not seem to be any different from the other disciples. However, Yun Yang was keenly aware that these 2 children were basically together all the time, and they were exceptionally diligent when it came to cultivating. In Yun Yang's eyes, each time they practiced their footwork, fist, saber or sword skills, they would ponder with a frown after each move, and repeat it once or twice until the movement was completely correct. And this was not the end. After confirming that the movements were correct, they would consider it further. Then, the 2 of them would practice and discuss it at the same time. Here, the tip of the left foot points outwards, the heel is raised, the tip of the right foot touches the ground. Turn to the left, punch with your left fist, bring your right elbow down, the palm of your right hand inside, bring it down. But what's the purpose of moving your elbow here? Here, face the enemy to the left, but what if there's an accident? Are your right hand and elbow reserved for other enemies? Here, when you swing your sword, lean your body forward, center of gravity forward. If there's an enemy on the side, this strike should be for speed and momentum, charge straight through. If there's an enemy on the back or the side, don't worry about the back, just block it from the side. Is there any other meaning? If it's a real battle, this strike is best for the throat. And so on. The boy and the girl were muttering to themselves in an extremely serious manner. Senior brother Bai, this strike should be. Junior sister Lin, it's not like this. I think it should be. Let's try it then. All right. It's indeed like this, it's smoother this way. It can save about half of the strength, right? Senior brother Bai, look at my strike. Lower your elbow an inch more and see how it works. Both of them were fully focused, fully immersing themselves in the cultivation realm that they had constructed, with no distractions in their hearts. Yun Yang paid attention to the 2 children's cultivation. Some of them were wrong, some of them were right, but he did not say anything. He only paid attention to them quietly, recalling the time when he had just come into contact with martial arts. Back then, he had been so serious. Each move, each style, each step, he had to study them seriously, asking himself countless questions. Why is it like this? What's the reason? He had thought about these questions countless times when he was splitting them up, and when he was executing them in one go, he had to think about it again. Whether it was eating or sleeping, he was thinking about it all the time. Looking at these 2 children, Yun Yang seemed to see himself in the past. It was not that the other peak's disciples did not have similar practices, but most of them practiced alone. Even when there was an occasional exchange, it was only a superficial taste, and they would soon separate again. Only these 2 little fellows were always together. From time to time, other disciples would make sarcastic remarks or try to talk to the little girl. But the little girl ignored them all. She only followed her senior brother by like a shadow, blindly following him, not leaving him by even an inch. Chapter 1021. As a result, the youth with the surname Bai naturally became the target of some of the disciples. There was a conflict of words from time to time. There was even a tall, burly, dark-skinned boy who went over to provoke him. Yun Yang was still paying attention, but that was all. Even when Kong Luoyue wanted to intervene, he was stopped by Yun Yang. Everyone has their own fate. If you want to stand out, you must first stand on your own. Kong Luoyue nodded in silence and said with a smile, "Big brother, do you want to see how these two children fare?" Yes, Bai has some foundation, Earth Mystic. This little girl, on the other hand, has no foundation to speak of, merely a few levels. However, these two children have a good innate talent and a good level of comprehension. How far they can go in the future depends more on Bai. Kong Luoyue was puzzled by Yin Yang's judgment. The little girl follows Bai. She's not bad-looking. She's already as pretty as a pearl at such a young age. When she grows up, she'll definitely be a beauty that can bring calamity to the nation and the people. Bai's cultivation base is higher, so he can help guide her. If they're safe and have a smooth journey, they'll be a perfect match. If something happens to Bai along the way, the little girl's temperament will most likely change, and she'll eventually fade into the crowd. These two children are the kind of people who walk a path to the end. They look soft, but they're actually Bai's resolute and Lin's straightforward. They're good seedlings. Yun Yang said faintly. 3 days later, we'll start dividing the disciples' resources and cultivation grounds. Do you understand? Yes, big brother. I've already prepared for this. Looking at the 10 disciples below him, Yun Yang said faintly, among these 10 disciples, there's a small martial world. When we're in the martial world, there's a martial world everywhere. This area is a martial world. The residence of 9 Supremes is also a martial world. Each peak is still a martial world, and the disciples are still martial world. Kong Luoyue shuddered, a look of realization appearing on his face. What do you mean, boss? As a master, I have to watch the martial world in my palm. However, I can't interfere too much with the martial world in my palm. Yun Yang smiled and drifted away. For the next 3 days, the residents of 9 Supremes maintained a similar pattern of behavior. The higher-ups devoted themselves to teaching their disciples, and then to their own special training, while the disciples devoted themselves to cultivating and training diligently. By the end of the day, everyone was as tired as a dog. Although the younger disciples cultivated on their own, they still had a certain degree of restraint, so that they would not overload themselves. On the other hand, the higher-ups were being drilled by the teacher in charge, Dong Qitian, to the point that they felt like dying. Yet, they still had to be energetic in the morning, appearing in front of their disciples with the demeanor of a grandmaster, showing off and guiding them. All in all, they refused to lose face in front of their disciples, so naturally, they had to suffer more because of their pride. No 8 of them, 9 young Supremes other than Supremes, were to Yun Yin to Tuit. Those 2 fellows didn't need to train their disciples, and they didn't have any work to do at this stage. After the special training, the 2 of them would either recuperate on their own, or find a place to drink tea, chat, or play chess. Yun. It was simply too satisfying. The 8 of them had fought with their lives on the line, just to get a chance to work. He even had to struggle to put on airs in front of his disciple. How King annoying. It was clearly a double act of wanting to save face and suffering. Due to such a negative mentality, these 8 people looked at Ping Xiaoyi and Guanuanyang like they were mortal enemies. What he did not know was that Ping Xiaoyi and Guanuanyang were just as aggrieved. Mother Ker. You are all venerable ones, so of course you have to put in more effort. Isn't this a matter of course? We have free time now because we haven't reached a high position yet. How can we let you take advantage of all the benefits? When there are gains, there are losses. Only by being willing can there be other gains. This is an unbreakable truth. All of you are angry and full of complaints. But why don't you look at Boss Yun Yang? He doesn't work as much as all of you, and he doesn't train as hard as all of you. But isn't he still full of energy from morning to night, looking refreshed and refreshed? This was what it meant when people compared themselves to each other. Money was exchanged. Why are all of you looking at us like this? What? Do you want to fight? Come on, who's afraid of whom? You have to think clearly, who's in a better state now? Who'll be at a disadvantage if we fight? You've come looking for trouble, You'll have nothing to do with anyone else. Fortunately, Shi Wuchen and the others were not idiots. They separated, cursing and swearing, after the confrontation. Looking at the 10 fellows, Yin Yang felt mentally drained. He had initially thought that the 10 of them would work together, or even overthrow him. Now, it seemed that there was no need for him to worry. These 10 fellows were basically 10 Lone Rangers. This included Lan Ruojuan and Ren Qingquang, the 2 idiots who were always together. As long as there was a chance, they would still trick each other without hesitation. They were the textbook definition of a bad friend. As long as they could trick the other party, they would be as happy as fur seals, not caring about their own pride at all. It was just like the Sex Disciple tournament this time. The 8 fellows were fierce and determined to win, their faces contorted with malevolence. We're the second peak. Even if we can't get first place, we can't fall to third. If we lose to your senior Uncle Luo, we're the third peak. Even if we can't get first place, we have to fight for second place. We're the third peak, but if we fight, we have to fight for first place. We're the 9th peak, but if we fight, we have to fight for first place. Sitting in the control room, Yun Yang listened to these fellows giving orders and assigning tasks through gritted teeth. When he heard one of them, he felt that their fighting spirit was commendable. When he heard 2, he felt that it was reasonable. When he heard 3, he felt that it was a coincidence. However, after 8 in a row, all of them were the same, leaving only waves of mental exhaustion. No wonder the Demiurge Flawed 10 had been famous for a long time, but their opponents knew that they were on the same side. But they were not afraid of you joining forces. F***CK, you're just a bunch of loose sand. No one is willing to submit to each other. There's a saying that mud can't support a wall. These people are even more unsociable than mud. If it weren't for this chance encounter, how could there be a gathering of the Demiurge Flawed 10? If it weren't for me, the lead supreme, forcefully suppressing them, the residents of 9 Supremes might have already been beaten into a pig's nest by these hot-headed fellows. However, the tournament this time, if the disciples of the sect leader of the Central Peak lose too badly, then that's not good either. In front of the residents of 9 Supreme Central Peak, there was a row of large words. 5 months and 8 days to the Celestial Luck Banner Battle. Yin Yang was extremely tired, sighing repeatedly. Now among the disciples, the youth with the highest cultivation base was at the pinnacle of Heaven Mystic. There were 4 of them, ranging from beginner to pinnacle of Heaven Mystic. 7 of them Earth Mystic. 11 of them Jade Mystic. 77 of them 9th level Mystical Qi. This result was achieved after Yin Yang's forceful promotion. Chapter 1022. Another 10 days had passed since the last forceful advancement. During these 10 days of transition, all the disciples had familiarized themselves, practiced, and consolidated their current realm like crazy. Unfortunately, the training time was still too short, and more than 90% of the disciples had not fully adapted to the current situation. There were even more than a dozen of them who had not even learned the cultivation methods, sword forms, and footwork that had been taught. This situation had nothing to do with personal effort, but more to do with personal aptitude, talent, and comprehension. This was all natural. Even if it was forced by external forces, it would still take a considerable amount of time. What the residents of 9 Supremes lacked now was buffer time. Time. In view of this situation, Yun Yang could only sigh helplessly and feel exhausted. He could snatch everything, but he could not snatch time. In the current situation of the residents of 9 Supremes, the cultivation base of the higher-ups was sufficient. However, the battle of the Celestial Luck Banner could not be won with sufficient cultivation base. At least, it was not enough to fulfill Yin Yang's vision. The cultivation base of the disciples was far from enough to participate in the battle. There were only 5 months and 8 days left. Facing an opponent that was at least a superior supreme, or even a second or third level venerable, how would he be able to fight and not lose? It would be best if they could not be injured or killed. This was not just a problem, it was an unsolvable problem. 5 months and 8 days. Not 5 years, not 50 years. Shi Wuchen and Luo Dajiang watched the disciples enter the arena, their brows furrowed. After a long time, Shi Wuchen and Luo Dajiang exchanged a look. Shi Wuchen walked to Yun Yang's side. "Boss, I'm afraid we can't go on like this. I've thought about it for a long time. Why don't we let the brothers take these little fellows out to gain some experience after this competition?" Shi Wuchen said in a low voice. Yun Yang turned his head and shot a cold gaze at him. "Shi Wuchen, what are you planning?" "It's always good to do some missions," Shi Wuchen said. "We don't do high-end missions, it's really just training." Yun Yang glared at him and said in a low voice. "Shi Wuchen, these are all your disciples, our disciples. The residence of 9 Supremes has just taken them in." Shi Wuchen coughed and said, "Didn't I say that I wouldn't take on those dangerous missions? Besides, we'll be watching over you from the shadows, so you'll be fine. Besides, if they don't experience it, they won't know what Jianghu is at all. Even if accidents do happen, it's better for it to happen now than later." Yin Yang was silent for a long time. Logic told him that Shi Wuchen's method was correct and correct. This was the best choice for these children. However, his feelings told him that doing this was exceptionally cruel. After this experience, it was enough to destroy these children's original worldview. Moreover, as long as he went out, he would definitely die. It was certain that there would be casualties. If they didn't die, how could they achieve their goal of alerting everyone? Even if the mission went smoothly, there would definitely be casualties. Only the blood of oneself and the people around him could truly make a martial artist vigilant. Engrave it in their hearts, and never forget it. The enemy's corpse did not leave such a deep impression. At the very least, to this group of children who had just stepped onto the path of martial cultivation, it was hard to engrave it in their minds. "All right." Yin Yang finally agreed, but his expression grew darker. Shi Wuchen's expression was somber as well. "There's no other way. It's the only thing we can do now." Yin Yang sucked in a breath and said, "I understand. Before the Celestial Luck Banner contest, there will be a bloody battle. All the rogue sects who have defeated 10 other sects and obtained the qualification to challenge will have to fight again. That time, it will also be a battle of life and death. A battle of life and death that the residents of 9 Supremes must face. When that time comes, I'm afraid the casualties will be unprecedented and unavoidable. Instead of waiting until then to face the problem of life and death, I'd rather face it earlier. If we can't be vigilant earlier, when that time comes, it won't just be the ordinary disciples who will die, but the elite disciples of the sect." "You're right, boss," Shi Wuchen said. Yun Yang said, "However, before we go out, we have to explain everything clearly to every disciple. We can't let people die for the sake of the dead. Each of them is more worldly than ordinary children. It's naturally better if they understand it themselves." Of course. Yin Yang nodded solemnly and sighed softly. He had just pulled them back from the brink of death, and now he had to send some of them back. Why did this enlightenment of his at this moment hurt so much? This was the first time the residence of 9 Supremes gathered all its disciples after the selection of disciples. And it was also the first time the residence of 9 Supremes held a competition. The sect competition was a battle, a competition. The disciples of the 9 Peaks looked at their brothers and sisters opposite them, their eyes burning with a strong fighting spirit. The path of martial arts. Those who were strong came first. Those who were strong came first. Everyone knew that the deeper meaning of the sect competition this time was to determine the top 10 disciples of the sect. In other words, this competition was the key to determining the fate of the residents of 9 Supremes in the next few years. It was the divergence of the path of cultivation. What was more, the ranking of the 9 Peaks of the residents of 9 Supremes in the future would be decided through this battle. After the top 10 disciples, it would be the battle between the disciples of the 9 Peaks of the same level. The time limit was 1 day and 1 night. Although it was a short story, the top 3 disciples of each peak were soon decided. The 8 of them, as well as Ping Xiaoyi and Guan Nuanying, who were here to act as judges, subconsciously clamped their mouths shut when they saw Yin Yang's disciple. It was an act of suppressing their laughter. The top 3 disciples of the other peaks were at least young men. However, the top three on Yun Yang's side cough. The oldest was 9 years old, and a little girl. The second was 8.5 years old, a little girl. The third was 8.5 years old, a little boy, the only male disciple. The top three disciples of the other peaks had the highest cultivation base in the realm of heaven mystic, while the weaker ones had the cultivation base of earth mystic. Their standards were similar, except for Yun Yang, who was the leader's disciple, whose cultivation base was the strongest, was only jade mystic. He had only just broken through to this realm. Yun Yang's expression was calm, but his heart was filled with helplessness and a splitting headache. F***CK. He was definitely going to be embarrassed this time. Yun Yang knew very well that he, the leader's peak, the top peak of the residence of 9 Supremes, was going to be embarrassed, at least for a period of time. Looking at Yun Yang's murderous gaze darting around, Qian Duo hid behind Shibuya and slowly retreated. With great difficulty, he retreated to the door and turned to flee. Little Fatty was certain that as long as he, the culprit, dared to enter, the sect leader would definitely beat him, the major domo, up in front of all the disciples. In the field, the disciples had already begun to fight. Yun Yang watched with a grim expression, his pretense of nonchalance gone. But he had done it, and he had even walked quite a distance on this path. The results of the residence of 9 Supremes disciple competition had been announced. Other than Shi Wuchen and Ren Qingquang, whose disciples each occupied 2 seats, the other 6 peaks each had 1 seat. This result also made it clear that none of the disciples from the main peak could make it into the top 10 disciples. He directly shaved his head. 8 people were beaming with joy, while Yin Yang's face was as dark as the bottom of a wok. The competition for the top 10 disciples had come to an end, but the sect competition was not over yet. There were still matches of the same level, since the top 10 disciples were the best of the best in the Sky Xian and Earth Xian ranks. The winner and loser had already been decided in the competition for the top 10 disciples. There was no longer any meaning in starting a battle, just the rankings would do, and no one would have any objections. Therefore, the main character of the matches of the same level fell on the disciples whose cultivation base was only at the level of Jade Mystic. There were plenty of disciples whose cultivation base had reached the level of Jade Mystic in each peak, be it the beginner level or the pinnacle. Even Yun Yang had someone who could participate in the competition, the little girl with the highest cultivation base under Yun Yang. At that moment, a stubborn and young voice rang out clearly. Yun Xiaoxin from the main peak awaits your guidance. Yun Xiaoxin, a 9-year-old girl, was Yun Yang's first disciple. The little girl Yu Xiaoxin had long noticed the unpleasant expression on her master's face. It was the first sect competition of the residents of 9 Supremes, but there was no one from the central peak among the top 10 disciples. Anyone would be furious. It was not that the little girl did not want to contribute, but she still had some self-awareness. With her meager cultivation base, it was simply an overestimation of her own ability to compete with peers who were above the level of Earth Mystic Pinnacle. She had endured it all the way and finally made it to the same level battle. Although the little girl was still a little girl, her frail body had already exuded an aura that was as sharp as a sword. I must snatch back the first place of Jade Mystic for my master. The little girl was determined and unyielding, her aura unparalleled. When the venerable lords of the residence of 9 Supremes saw this frail little girl, not only did they not feel it was strange, but their eyes lit up instead. Shi Wuchen murmured to himself, "This little girl is a little interesting." The battle began. It had to be said that the battle between Jade Mystic cultivators was much more interesting than the battle between Heaven Mystic and Earth Mystic cultivators. At the very least, the outcome of the battle was not so clear. Yun Xiaoxin's first opponent was a little boy of about 10 years old. As soon as the battle began, everyone could see that the little girl had an absolute advantage. The little boy's lips were tightly pressed together, his little face filled with seriousness, exuding a cold and aloof aura. The sword in his hand flickered with a cold gleam, and in just 3 moves, the little boy was already shrouded in layers of sword light. Although the little boy was at a disadvantage, he was unwilling to admit defeat and fought back with all his might. However, everyone knew that the initiative had been lost. Even if Li Xing fought back, it would be futile and would only hasten his defeat. However, after just 2 moves, the little boy suddenly grunted. His shoulder was bleeding, and his sword flew out of his hand. Seeing that her attack was successful, the little girl did not push it too far and immediately retreated. Thank you for letting me win. Yun Xiaoxin had won the first battle. There were a total of 11 people in the 9 peaks, whose cultivation base had reached the Jade Mystic level. 5 had advanced, 5 had lost, and 1 had advanced directly. Luck had always been a part of one's strength. With such a fate, no one could say anything about it. Yun Xiaoxin's next opponent was an 11-year-old girl. Her cultivation base was a notch higher than the little girl's, but her power was not as strong as the little girl. After a round of fierce battles, the little girl won both matches. After 2 rounds, there were only 2 people who could maintain a winning record. In other words, as long as Yun Xiaoxin won 1 more round, she would be able to ascend to the top of the Jade Mystic level. Boss, this little girl disciple of yours is really putting her life on the line. Shi Wuchen's gaze was a little solemn as he said, but a disciple like her is too aggressive. She's easily broken when she's tough, and she doesn't have a good personality. I'm afraid she'll only anger you if she's on your side. Don't be fooled by her soft and gentle appearance. She's definitely a thorn in her bones. Why don't you transfer her to me? I'll work hard for you, brother. Yun Yang chuckled and replied as gently as he could. Scram. Shi Wuchen looked aggrieved, his heart filled with indignation. With such an unbending character, he should be my disciple instead. The other undefeated opponent was also a female disciple. With a glance, Yun Yang realized that this female disciple was junior sister Lin. Yes, she was Bai Yexing's junior sister Lin Xiaoro. Chapter 1024. The fight between the 2 beautiful Lolas made Yun Yang and the other leaders of the sects shudder with fear. The 2 little Lolas were both delicate and gentle. One was a pearl, and the other was a jade. Just by looking at them, they were indescribably adorable. Lin Xiaoro was a year or 2 older than Yun Xiaoxin, and an inch and a half taller. Yun Xiaoxin was cold and fierce, but this Lin Xiaoro was also cold all over. Her eyes were sharp and calm. As they fought, the 2 little girls were no longer as gentle and pleasant as they usually were. Their moves were fierce and dangerous, and they were exchanging injuries for injuries and risking their lives. It was extremely fierce. In just 5 moves, both of them were already bleeding. These 2 little girls were actually more ruthless than the other, each more desperate than the other. They had completely turned the saying of not giving in on the spot and not showing mercy into a textbook. The higher-ups of the residence of 9 Supremes were all frightened as they watched. There was no such thing as a woman's appearance. Many of their moves were actually aimed at each other's faces. You really can't judge a book by its cover. I thought when women are ruthless, they can't be stopped, but why are girls the same? Even Luo Dajiang, who claimed to be a ruthless man, grimaced and was dumbfounded when he saw the scene. It was too fierce. Sword light flashed in the field, and a cold gleam overflowed in all directions. The 2 girls were actually evenly matched. From the looks of it, it wouldn't be a problem for this battle to last for another hour. Yun Yang and the others could even see that in the end, when the 2 little girls were exhausted and sat on the ground, whoever stood up first would be the winner. It was at this moment that 2 shooting stars suddenly flashed into the sky at the same time. The 2 little girls sprung up at the same time, cried out at the same time, and rushed toward each other, as if they had become one with their swords. Both of them were smart people. They knew that their real strength was roughly equal, and so was their fighting spirit. It would not be easy to determine the winner, so they might as well take the risk. You want to fight for your master's honor, and I want to fight for my master's honor as well. You're not the only one who wants to fight for your master. I want to fight for my master too. Just by looking at their postures, it was clear that the 2 little girls didn't care about their lives and didn't hesitate to die. Their hearts were filled with determination, and when they put it into action, there was no turning back. However, their cultivations were similar, And their true battle prowess was similar as well. Their lethality was also about the same. It was more than enough to kill someone, but their self-defense instincts were obviously unable to keep up. I'm afraid both sides will die if they collide. Tai Ching-song had already risen to his feet. I won't. Luo Dajiang had been paying close attention to the movements in the field, observing carefully and meticulously. At this moment he said in a deep voice, that Lin Xiaoro is already at the end of her tether, and her body is swaying a little, but she's barely holding on. Although Yin Xiuxin is tired as well, at least she's not swaying. It's clear who's stronger. However, this move was clearly a mutual destruction. Although Yin Xiuxin is a little stronger, she can't avoid this fatal strike. This sword is aimed at the heart. These two little girls are really ruthless. On the other side, Kong Luoyue had already flown up and shouted, admit defeat. Then he flew out like a bolt of lightning. At the same time, Yun Yang, Shi Wuchen, Ren Qingquang, and the others had also lifted their butts, but when they saw Kong Luoyue flying out, they sat down again. It was not easy for them to have such a good seedling, and they could not let him be crippled in a match between their own sex. With a soft sound, the two little Lolas were separated. Both girls landed on the ground, staggered a few steps, and finally sat down on the ground. The difference was that the moment Yin Xiuxin landed on the ground, her waist, legs, and buttocks sprang up like springs. She drew a sword flower and held it behind her, neatly. On the other side, Lin Xiaoro also struggled to get up, but she could not do it directly. Only by using her sword to support herself did she manage to stand up. How could the little girl not realize that she had lost? She pouted and almost burst into tears. Her eyes were rimmed red, and tears finally trickled down her cheeks. Under Kong Luoyue's gentle comfort, she wiped her tears and stood up, saying with red eyes, Senior Sister Yin, I'll definitely defeat you next time. Yin Xiuxin panted and said, I won't be defeated. She panted again and announced in a loud voice, I won't be defeated in the same level. The crowd was dumbfounded. Where did you get the confidence to say that you are invincible in the same level? Don't you know that the last few of Earth Mystic have only broken through on the eve of the match? I guess any one of them can defeat you. A little girl who has just stepped into the Jade Mystic realm. Yin Xiuxin walked up to the high platform with her swaying body and came to Yin Yang. She knelt down and kowtowed. This disciple, fortunately, did not fail. I didn't embarrass Master. Yin Yang looked amiable as he said with a smile. Not bad, not bad. Xiuxin, the name I gave you is not in vain. Before coming to the residence of 9 Supremes, the little girl was an orphan with no parents and only knew that she was called Xiao. Yin Yang felt touched and gave her the name Yin Xiuxin. It was normal for a disciple to follow their master's surname. He did not expect the little girl to fight so hard today. Chapter 10:25. The 10 teams were like 10 sharp arrows, darting in 10 different directions in the night, heading towards their respective targets. Yin Yang stood before the residence of 9 Supremes mountain gate, looking up at the gloomy night sky. He was speechless for a moment before he turned to leave. Dong Qitian, who had been by his side, walked with his arms behind his back and said, 99 disciples. Why don't you divide them into 11 teams, and bring a team of your own? Isn't it better to take the lead and gain the upper hand? I'm the sect leader, Yin Yang replied faintly. Dong Qitian chuckled and did not comment further. Qian Duo. I'm coming. Your first priority now is to look after the family. Other than that, the remaining human traffickers, other than the 10 groups they're targeting this time, have to further confirm their background and true strength. You still have a month's time. This matter must be settled as soon as possible. Understood. How much information do you have on the human traffickers now? 137. 137. Yin Yang sucked in a deep breath of cold air. 137. Human trafficker groups. You've grasped so many in such a short time. How many families in this bound of universe have lost their children and families because of these 137 human trafficker groups? Go then. There's no harm in being careful. Be careful. All right. Qian was now filled with righteous indignation towards these human traffickers. In the past, Qian was used to calling himself a merchant, so he had no feelings towards human trafficking. However, as he dealt with these people and saw many heinous acts and heartless methods, little Fatty wanted to uproot such organizations almost at every moment and kill every member of such organizations to vent his righteous indignation. These fellows were truly inhumane and heartless. Therefore, while Qian Duo was still working hard to increase the number of disciples for the sect, he had also made the search for human traffickers his top priority. He swore to find all these malignant tumors and eliminate them all. Not a single one was spared. Not a single one was spared. He would kill them all with 1,000 slashes. Now that the sect had finally begun their purge, the little Fatty felt a sense of satisfaction from the bottom of his heart. "You're going out?" Dong Qitian looked at Yun Yang, a sudden realization dawning on him. Yun Yang replied, "Senior is wise. I happen to have my own matters to attend to while Shi Wuchen and the others are not around." Dong Qitian smiled with understanding in his eyes and said, "Yun Yang, actually, some sacrifices are necessary. A soft-hearted person is destined not to achieve great things." Yun Yang said with a dark expression, "I'm only going out for some private matters. Is there a need to be so serious?" Dong Qitian continued, "But have you thought about how you're going to deal with the aftermath of your attack this time? Or should I say, where are you going to arrange for these fated people?" Yun Yang stopped and stared at Dong Qitian for a long time. What a fated person! What a great arrangement! The meaning behind this was thought-provoking and enlightening. After a while, Yun Yang said bitterly, "Elder Dong, are you really sure that I'm going to do these things?" Dong Qitian smiled faintly. As the saying goes, a small clue reveals a big picture. There are 99 disciples and 10 teams. You didn't lead them out, so the opportunity has already shown itself. How can I not guess? After all, to you, the so-called dignity of a sect leader is nothing compared to the pleasure of fighting alongside your brothers. You're too proud to put on airs. Yun Yang smiled bitterly. It was not an easy task for him to keep any secrets in front of this old fox, who was experienced in the martial world. He had only revealed a little of his thoughts, but this old monster had already seen through him. Had his acting skills deteriorated to such an extent? Dong Qitian said, "I'm not surprised at all by your thoughts. What I'm curious about is something else. You're only one person. Can you take care of everyone?" Yun Yang asked. "Actually, it's not my concern whether you can take care of them or not. My concern is, this can be the second thing you want me to do." Dong Qitian smiled and revealed his true intention. Yun Yang thought about it, his mood suddenly turning better. "Elder Dong, are you looking for a few successors in this residence?" Dong Qitian was displeased. "The cultivation base of your sect's disciples is shallow, and their foundations are mediocre. How many of them are worthy of my attention?" Yun Yang chuckled and said, "That's good. We'll follow Elder Dong's wishes. How about you take the east and I take the west?" Dong Qitian snorted. "Are you willing to admit it now? Old thing." Yun Yang's embarrassment turned into anger. "Just tell me if you're going or not." Dong Qitian guffawed, his heart filled with delight. Everything must be done in the dark this time. The other disciples must not find out. "Of course I know better than you." Dong Qitian was silent for a moment before he said, "I'm going to use this opportunity to leave the mountain to go home once." Yun Yang was silent for a moment before he said, "I understand Elder Dong's intention. Elder Dong, please bring the few children you've saved along, and come back together after you're done with this." Dong Qitian glanced at him and said, "I'm not that weak." "Elder Dong, you're overthinking it. I'm only asking you to keep an eye on my disciples. That's all." Yun Yang spoke in a light tone. Dong Qitian, on the other hand, chuckled dryly and turned to leave without saying anything else. Traveling eastward, they were soon in the wilderness. It was bleak and desolate, but Dong Qitian could still feel a sense of warmth lingering in his heart. This child's mind is too meticulous. Guanuanyang and his entourage arrived at their destination, the Galactic City. The 10 children that Guanuanyang brought along included Yin Yang's eldest disciple, Yin Xiuxin, his second disciple, Cheng Jiejia, and his third disciple Hu Xiaofan. All 10 of them were Yin Yang's disciples, the so-called leaders' team. As far as the eye could see, at the end of the night, there was a large house with continuous roof tiles. According to our intelligence, there are a total of 45 people in this mansion, including men and women. There are 32 rooms on the surface, but there are many secret passages and dark rooms underground. The captured children are basically placed in the dark rooms, and there are people guarding them at all times. The enemy's combat strength consists of 10 heaven mystic martial artists, 5 supremacy experts, and 1 honor expert. The rest of them won't be lower than earth mystic level. It's just that they're very sparsely distributed, so there's a considerable gap in their attacks. Guan Yuanyang spoke confidently, as if he did not take the enemy seriously, even pointing out the enemy's strength and flaws in their defense. But the more he spoke, the more anxious he felt. F***CK. Chapter 1026. There were a total of 10 people in his team. The highest cultivation base among them was Jade Mystic. Each and every one of them was lively and tender. Their eyes were clear and without any impurities, and their eyes were filled with innocence. Any supreme cultivator from the other side could wipe them out with a single slap. Although it would be easy for him to kill this group of people, he was confident that no one would be able to escape. However, the current situation was that he had to bring along a bunch of helpers with shallow cultivation bases to fight alongside him. How could it be easy to ensure the safety of each disciple in the battle royale? This was simply something that even immortals couldn't do, okay? Guan Yuanyang's head was throbbing at this dilemma. The 10 disciples stared at Guan Yuanyang anxiously. Everyone could hear it. This battle was nothing to Uncle Master Gua, whose cultivation base was already in Saint Realm. It would be an exaggeration to say that he was handling it with ease, but to them, it was like going through a mountain of daggers and a sea of fire. They might not even make it out alive. This is your first battle, a battle that you must face. It's the starting point of your war career. Guan Yuanyang's voice was devoid of emotion. I'm here to say that someone will die in this battle. I'm not sure which of you it will be yet. No matter who it is, those who are still alive must get used to it. Get used to the fact that the people around you keep falling. This kind of life. This is the martial world. This is your first battle, your first lesson, as you step onto the line of life and death. At this moment, the 10 children all held their breaths, not making a single sound. The purpose of this battle is to annihilate the enemy. As the saying goes, when the enemy is unprepared, the opportunity is mine. Once we charge and kill anyone you see, leave no one alive. Showing mercy to the enemy is being cruel to our own. Guan Yuanyang's words were cold. I'll watch over all of you. I'll try my best to take care of each and every one of you. But there's a limit to a person's strength. If there's anything I can't see, I hope you understand the following words. Life and death are decreed by fate. Riches and honor are determined by the heavens. When the 10 children heard this, their bodies suddenly trembled, and a special atmosphere was born. Yin Xiuxin gripped the sword in her hand tightly, feeling her palms drenched in sweat. She repeatedly warned herself not to panic, not to be afraid, repeatedly reciting the words, "The opportunity is with me. Attack the enemy when they are unprepared." But still, she could not help but panic in fear. Just as his mind was in a state of chaos, he heard Martial Uncle Gua say calmly, "Begin! Attack!" In the dark night, Guan Yuanyang's tall form was the first to turn into a ghostly shadow, drifting away like a phantom. The dozen or so people on this side were all bleeding from their throats, and their bodies were in a strange position as they fell to the ground. The large amount of blood that gushed out almost formed a small stream. The situation looked extremely tragic, but in fact, even if the enemies nearby were not dead, they had suffered fatal injuries and were definitely unable to fight anymore. This area could be considered as a temporary safe zone. Guan Yuanyang did not linger. He flew up and crossed hundreds of feet of the yard, his palms slamming heavily on the thick wooden door like a thunderbolt. Boom! The entire door was instantly smashed into smithereens, just like the dust in the sky. Just as the door was destroyed, a few beams of light shot out from the room. It was the enemy's gap, the moment when the ambushers had exhausted their strength. The enemy's counterattack was timed perfectly. If it had been aimed at someone weaker, it could at least buy some time, even if it could not succeed immediately. However, Guan Yuanying was far superior to his opponent. With a cold snort, he had already evaded all the counterattacks. The sword in his hand was like a thunderbolt, circling the room forcefully. Wherever it passed, people fell with blood splattering everywhere it passed. In the blink of an eye, there was no one left alive in the room. Guan Yuanying heaved a sigh of relief. One of the enemy's honor-level experts had died in his hands, as well as 2 cultivators who were above the supreme level. This round of attack indicated that the enemy's combat power had been reduced by more than half. The remaining ones were not a threat at all, and the danger had been eliminated. But even so, the remaining enemies were still powerful enemies to those little fellows. He still needed to take care of them carefully, and he couldn't be careless. Guan Yuanying was calculating in his heart, cursing Shi Wuchen, who had come up with this training idea. What a lousy idea. Chapter 1027. Loud bangs could be heard coming from the outside. Guan Yuanying had killed many of the enemy experts in the room. Although it had only taken him a short while, it had taken him some effort after all. However, the area that had been safe earlier was no longer safe. The battle between the enemy and himself had begun. Someone was yelling in a frenzy. "Who are you? Who are you? This is 100 Flower Court. Who are you?" There were grunts and cries as well. Guan Yuanying strolled out like he was taking a stroll, his hawk-like eyes scanning the battle around him. The little fellows were still alive and holding on, but all of them were at a disadvantage without exception. A few of them were already bathed in blood, in a precarious situation. Suddenly, a young cry rang out. It was Hu Xiaofan, who could not evade in time, and was struck on his right shoulder. He staggered backward and spat a mouthful of blood. There was a savage laugh in front of him as a few sabers came slashing down almost at the same time, filled with murderous intent. Xiaofan. Yun Xiaoxin was enraged when she saw that her fellow disciple was in danger. She wanted to rush over to help, but her panic had caused her to lose her footing. Before she could rush over to help, she was the one who had been slashed. The situation that had been slightly stable took a turn for the worse. Everything happened in a split second. With a long howl, a divine blade that resembled a divine dragon came to their aid. The 3 men's grins were still on their faces, but their heads had already been lopped off. Seeing that his disciples were in danger, Guan Yuanying did not hold back anymore. As he attacked with all his might, the sword in his hand was like a dragon soaring in the sky. From east to west, from southeast to north, he charged back and forth, killing those who stood in his way. The 3 enemies who had intended to slash Hu Xiaofan were the first to be decapitated. Guan Yuanying was well aware of the current situation. He was peerless in this battlefield. It was only a matter of time before he was able to annihilate his enemies completely. Even if he attacked with all his might, the speed of killing his enemies would only be slightly faster at most. It did not mean that the little fellow's safety could be guaranteed. However, as long as he continued to charge forward, he would be able to create psychological pressure on his enemies that was far beyond what they could bear. Perhaps such pressure could help the little fellows keep their lives? This was the best Guan Yuanying could do right now. Cries rang incessantly from the side. Some belonged to the enemy, some belonged to the 10 disciples. Guan Yuanying would rush over as soon as he heard the disciples' cries. His unparalleled murderous intent terrified everyone from the Flora Garden, their will to fight waning. Seeing that Guan Yuanying was too strong for them to handle, someone cried out and leaped over the wall to escape. There were also some who revealed expressions of despair. They no longer held back and attacked with all their might towards the small opponents in front of them. It was obvious that they were prepared to risk their lives. 1 was enough and 2 was enough. As the situation unfolded, Guan Yuanying rushed to help everywhere. Although he was still overwhelmed by the number of disciples, he gradually felt like he was struggling to cope. It was not that he was lacking in energy, nor was it due to the excessive consumption of mystical qi, but there was a limit to a person's strength. How could one man help everywhere, especially when the 10 disciples were spread out? At the same time, the rumbling sound of an explosion suddenly came from inside the mansion, and flames rose to the sky. This was the fire that had been set earlier, gradually spreading to the mansion's oil storage. Much of the kerosene stored in the mansion was ignited, and a huge explosion ensued. Coincidentally, Guan Yuanying was right in front of the unexpected explosion. He could only feel a strong force that exceeded his resistance coming at him. With a cry, he somersaulted away. Guan Yuanying had no time to care about anything else. If he had held on with all his might, he might have been the first to fall under this unexpected change. Fortunately, the sudden violence was short-lived and did not actually hurt Guan Yuanying. At most, it would only slightly exhaust a portion of his protective mystical qi. It was inconsequential. However, in this short period of time, the 2 disciples screamed and fell to the ground. Cheng Jiejie cried out in pain as well. Her thigh was pierced by the opponent's sword. Cheng Jiejie's opponent's cultivation base was more than a level higher than hers. It was just that his consciousness had been taken away, and he was distracted. Now that his attack was successful, he was merciless. The blood-stained sword went for Cheng Jiejie's chest once more. Cheng Jiejie tried her best to evade, but she could only avoid the vital point on the left side of her chest. Her opponent's sword still pierced through her right chest. Just as her chest was pierced through, Cheng Jiejie felt a sudden surge of warmth within her. Could it be that the feeling of death is always this comfortable? The little girl was stunned for a moment before she fainted. It was then that the person's mystical qi erupted in her chest, obviously intending to end her life. However, it was nullified by a strange energy. As the sword light flashed, Guan Yuanying had already chopped off the man's head in a fit of rage and kicked the corpse away. It was only a momentary gap, but it caused the battle to completely go out of control. Disciples were injured everywhere, and almost all the disciples fell into a terrible situation where they were in a panic. A young disciple of the residence of 9 Supremes was suddenly struck on the head by a hammer. His brain splattered, and he died instantly. He was not at a complete disadvantage at first. At least, there was still room to maneuver. According to Guan Yuanying's prediction, he could at least exchange 2 more blows with his opponent, enough to buy himself enough time to come back. However, he was panicking now, his eyes darting around him, tears welling up in his eyes. Under such circumstances, his opponent's combat strength was reduced, and his fighting spirit was shaky, but he had still seized the opportunity to kill with a single strike. The fire blazed as the people of Blossom Court were either dead or running away. Guan Yuanying looked at his disciples who had gathered. Not only were all of them injured, what was worse was that 3 of them had died, including Yin Yang's second disciple Cheng Jiejie, whom he valued a lot. Guan Yuanying was infuriated as he hollered, "Where do you think you're going?" He sprung up and gave chase. With his cultivation base, it was a piece of cake for him to hunt down these small fries, no matter how scattered they were. It did not take long for Guan Yuanying to return, bathed in blood. "Count, senior uncle, there were 45 people in Blossom Court. There are 37 bodies here now. I've killed 7 of them who escaped. There's still 1 more left. Search the ground." Guan Yuanying's murderous aura was overflowing, like a demon. The 7 who had escaped had all been killed by him. There was still 1 that did not add up in terms of head count alone. With a loud boom, the cellar was blown open, and a silhouette could be seen fleeing frantically from the other side. Guan Yuanying's sword light flew out like a meteor, imbued with mystical qi from hundreds of feet away, blasting the person into pieces. He snorted coldly and said, "Count the loot." The 7 disciples who could still move left with the order. Chapter 1028. The children who had been rescued were not in good shape, but most of them were still physically fit. A few of them had their legs broken, a ghastly sight to behold. These children were not gifted and had no room for cultivation, so they could not be bought or sold normally. They could only be used to beg on the streets with crippled legs. The 7 children had even found a few children stuffed into jars deep in the dark chamber, with only their heads sticking out. This was the method used to train dwarves and deformed people. First, the target child's body would be fully developed in the jar, and then they would be trained in various eye-catching skills. In other words, they would be the backup candidates for future acrobatics or begging. Many of the girls who had been rescued were delicate and pretty, obviously unabused. Although these girls were not suffering for the time being, they were constantly on guard against accidents during their growth process. Once their faces were injured, or they grew fat or disabled, they would be sent to hell immediately. The 7 children looked pained as they watched. "Search carefully. All the assets here are ours," Guanuanyang said coldly. "We're completing a mission now. We're selling our lives as cashiers. There's no such thing as robbing lives and not wealth. Don't miss out on any bit of wealth. 7 of you, move separately. Merit will be determined by the results." Under Guanuanyang's command, the 7 children split up and moved individually. It was only when Guanuanyang saw the 7 children scatter that he sprang out, his face and heart filled with anguish. The corpses of the 3 children had to be collected. It did not matter if the children were injured this time, but he really did not know how to explain it to Yunyang now that 3 of them were dead. Guanuanyang's eyes widened as he searched around to confirm the situation, because after searching everywhere, he could only find a corpse. Where were the other 2 corpses? Where had they gone? There was only the corpse of the young boy whose head was smashed to a pulp. Guanuanyang had seen the other 2 clearly. They were dead. Chung Jiejia had been stabbed in the chest, and had suffered a burst of mystical qi, blowing a large hole in his chest. How could he not be dead with such a severe injury? As for the other male disciple, he had been stabbed in the chest as well. The mystical qi that had passed through him had blasted a gaping hole in his back. It was a fatal wound as well. After suffering such injuries, as long as the injured did not have the cultivation of a saint or above, there was absolutely no room for recovery. Even if a holy venerable protected him and healed him, it was still difficult for him to survive. But just like that, how could these 2 bodies mysteriously disappear? Guanuanyang frowned deeply. In a corner of the courtyard, the 40 to 50 children rescued by the 7 little ones were huddled together, shivering like a group of chicks in the cold wind. The ones with broken legs, and the 4 or 5 children stuffed in the jars were surrounded in the middle. Their limbs were almost crippled. Guanuanyang sighed, filled with regret as he looked at the children. He regretted letting those scumbags die so easily. He should have injured them instead of killing them. Then, he would have tortured them bit by bit, letting them live as long as they could, torturing them every day. He continued to torture them until they could no longer do it anymore. Then, he would save them and continue tormenting them. Only then would the debt be settled. Looking at these pitiful children, Guanuanyang had no time to think about anything else. He retrieved a few bottles from his robe and distributed one to each of them. These medicinal pills were Dong Qitian's sacred healing medicine, miraculously effective for internal and external injuries. They were especially effective for these children, especially those who were crippled, and those who were trapped in the jars with limp limbs. Guanuanyang swiftly adjusted the broken bones of the children with broken legs and reconnected them. He then fed them a healing medicinal pill to ensure that the medicinal effect was sufficient. As for the deformed children who were trapped in the jars with limp limbs, Guanuanyang made up his mind and broke the bones of the children's hands and legs before reconnecting them. He then channeled a stream of natal energy and 4 medicinal pills to each of them to help them reconstruct their bones and muscles, reviving them. The rest would depend on the spiritual qi of the residents of 9 Supremes. Guanuanyang waited for a while after his treatment, before he saw the children dragging big boxes out one after another. Large amounts of belongings were scattered all over the courtyard. He then went back to move them. Humph! Move them all back. Guanuanyang's hatred grew as he looked at the mountains of resources and treasures. How many children had they harmed to accumulate such wealth? Guanuanyang's brows were still knitted in confusion. How was he going to explain this when he returned? It was understandable to say that there were casualties. It was expected. However, the current situation was that there were too many casualties. 3 of them had fallen in one go. A 30% loss ratio was simply too much. What was more, the bodies of 2 of them were nowhere to be found. It was not a pleasant thing to say. Yin Xiuxin's gaze wandered. There was sadness in her eyes, but there was also a hint of relief. It was a relief that was so calm that it bordered on indifference. Jiajia's body is gone. Shaoqi's body is gone as well, Yin Xiuxin reported after searching the surroundings. Guanuanyang sucked in a soft breath and stared at Yin Xiuxin. The girl's calmness surprised even him. It did not matter whether she was calm or indifferent, but she could not be cold-blooded. Yin Xiuxin was still searching, over and over again, confirming it bit by bit. Xiuxin, don't you feel sad? Guanuanyang could not help asking, looking at the 6 disciples who were crying beside him. Of course I do. How can I not? Yin Xiuxin looked up. But Master had said solemnly before we left that we would have to go through this sooner or later. Jia and the others are just encountering this earlier. Only those who have gone through life and death can be considered to have experienced the martial world. Guanuanyang's heart skipped a beat. The martial world isn't only about legends and glory. What's most common in the martial world is the separation of life and death, deception, bloodshed and cruelty. These are the eternal mainstream of the martial world. Yin Xiuxin paused and continued. Only when you've truly traveled the martial world and experienced life and death personally, do you realize that the ideal world that the youth yearned for isn't the martial world at all. Guanuanyang was speechless. Boss Yin Yang, what have you been teaching your disciples? This is. Yin Yang thought to himself. Stop crying, all of you. Yin Xiuxin was like a senior sister as she reprimanded them. What are you crying for? What's the use of crying? Can your tears bring Jia and the others back? You'll all die one day. None of you are allowed to cry. If anyone cries again, I will beat him to death. The 6 little fellows were startled, looking up as if they were looking at the king of hell. Haven't you always yearned for the martial world to have an endless amount of money to spend, the blink of an eye on 1,000 mountains, the luxurious carriages and peerless beauties? Do you still want it now? Do you still want it? Answer me. Yin Xiuxin pointed at a boy's chest fiercely. Don't you fantasize that there are countless masters and swordsmen in the world of martial artists? That you can meet 3 fortuitous encounters in a single step? And that you can enjoy an endless amount of delicacies? Do you still want that now? You. I don't know what's going on in your head every day. You've been shouting about roaming the martial world every day. Do you still want it now? Why are all of you mute? Say something, go on blabbering. The 6 little fellows hung their heads low, their eyes still rimmed with red tears. Their sobs were incessant, but they dared not cry out loud anymore. Finally, another little fellow muttered indignantly, Weren't you the same before? You were still saying the day before yesterday that you could see immortal pills as soon as you lowered your head in the martial world, that you could obtain secret manuals as soon as you stretched out your hand, that you'd rise to heaven in a single step because of fate. You're still talking. Yin Xiuxin was enraged. How dare you defame this eldest senior sister's teachings? Clean the latrine for half a month when you go back. The little boy shrieked. No. Guanuanyang's brows were twitching as he watched. He had brought along Yin Yang's disciples this time, so he could not be sure how the other teams were doing. In spite of this, Guanuanyang was certain of one thing. The other residents of 9 Supreme's disciples would never be as calm as his team, especially when this team had Yin Xiuxin as its leader. This little girl was an oddity who practiced martial arts. The oddity here could only be described in the truest and most direct sense. Chapter 1029. Guanuanyang could only feel envy. If only I had a disciple like her. Yin Xiuxin alone had managed to gather all her junior brothers and sisters into a well-behaved and orderly manner. There was no need for him to go and comfort them. She had taken care of all the aftermath. This was already quite rare and precious. Furthermore, Guanuanyang was sure of something else. Yin Xiuxin had not done it consciously. No matter how intelligent she was still not old enough to consider these things on her own accord. Her experience had not been enough to experience these things, and the time she had spent in the sect was far from the point where Yun Yang could teach her these things. In other words, what she said and did was completely out of instinct. However, she had used this instinct to tame all 6 of her junior brothers and sisters, increasing her martial world experience and dispelling her personal fantasies, as well as the fear of facing death. Yun Xiaoxin was still looking up and lecturing her junior brothers and sisters. If one day you die too, and die like Jejia and the others, I'll clean up your bodies for you. I won't let you disappear just like that, without leaving any bones behind. The 6 little fellows were pale, their faces drained of all color. It would be strange if they could look good when they heard someone else talking about their own afterlife at their age. If I die one day, Yun Xiaoxin looked up at them. Remember to keep my body and bones away. If my head falls off, you must sew it up. Do you hear me? Yes, yes. Yun Xiaoxin said in relief. If your heads fall off, I'll sew them up for you too. This is our promise. You can't forget it even if you die. Guan looked up at the sky. This bunch of little boys, little Lolis. What are they talking about? He could not listen to them anymore. Your father wants to forget such nonsense now. The loot this time seems to be a lot, but it's only about 8,000 upper-class spiritual jade pieces at most. It shouldn't be so little, right? Yun Xiaoxin said. Tear down the house and secret chamber and search. Hearing their eldest senior sister's order, the little fellows swarmed away once more. He watched as the convoy went further and further away. Yun Yang walked out with 2 tiny figures in his arms. The second disciple, Cheng Jejia, and the 6th disciple Lu Changman. The 2 little fellows were now awake, and their minds were clear. Master, I am sorry. We have embarrassed you. The 2 little fellows' faces were full of shame, wishing for nothing more than to really die just now and put an end to all troubles. Shameful. It doesn't matter. In the martial world, who can remain unshameful all the time? Even I, your master, was in danger of perishing at the hands of my enemies all those years ago. My soul was obliterated, and I was beyond redemption. When the battle ended, Dong Qitian left without showing himself, just like Yun Yang. He did not bring anyone with him. It turned out that these fellows were actually so irresponsible when they brought out their disciples. Dong Qitian truly felt the pinch now. Every single one of the residents of 9 Supreme's disciples was exceptionally gifted. Such a loss was equivalent to the loss of a hero. It was more important for him to seize the time and head to the other side. 3 days later, Yun Yang stood at the entrance of the square within the residence of 9 Supreme's mountain gate, with a solemn expression. Behind him stood 11 children in a row. Other than Yun Yang's 4 disciples, there were also 7 disciples of the other 3 fellows. These disciples were all members of the teams that had gone out for this mission and had been judged dead. The residents of 9 Supremes had sent out a total of 99 disciples from the 9 peaks for this mission. In the end, there were only 75 people, including the 11 that Yun Yang had saved in secret, who had returned. In other words, a total of 24 disciples had died outside. The last team that Dong Qitian and Yun Yang had rescued had especially heavy casualties. 7 of Shirbujia's disciples had died in this external battle. It was the most tragic one. Team after team returned. All the disciples gathered at the mountain gate. Almost all of them were injured and covered in cuts and bruises. Many of the children who saw Cheng Jejia, Lu Changman, and the others standing in the sect could not help crying out in surprise. However, once their gazes met Yun Yang's somber expression, no one dared speak. Those who had returned first dared not make a sound, standing quietly and waiting for the other teams to return. By noon, the survivors of the 10 teams had all returned to the residence of 9 Supremes. I've brought back 11 of the 99 people who went out. You've brought back 64, and none of them are uninjured. The remaining 24 have died outside, never to return. The higher-ups of the residence of 9 Supremes gathered together, their expressions grim. Chapter 1030. Yun Yang's tone was unprecedentedly somber as he looked at Shi Wuchen, Luo Dajiang and the others. Shi Wuchen's expression remained unchanged as he said, "This is a necessary martial world experience, a baptism of life and death. Boss, in my opinion, you shouldn't have made a move. I also know that Elder Dong has most likely made a move as well. But if you guys make a move this time, not only will the effect of this Jianghu experience be greatly reduced, it will also make these disciples develop a reliance and hope that they will be lucky." Yin Yang said, "If we didn't do it, how many of the 99 people who went out with you could come back? Could there even be 20? Wuchen, I know what you mean. Using the cruelest method of life and death to grind out the weak and keep the strong can indeed make them mature faster, even grow faster, but..." Yin Yang said softly, "Wuchen, if the residents of Nine Supremes needs to use this method to grow and become talents, then what's the point of us, a group of higher-ups, existing?" Shi Wuchen was speechless for a moment. "Our sect has always existed as a tool for the martial world's hegemony. I hope that the residents of Nine Supremes is a big family." Yin Yang said slowly, "The existence of the sect's higher-ups, other than to develop and strengthen themselves, should be more of a shelter for the sect's disciples. This is the state of a healthy sect, a state that I'd be happy to see. If we were to train the disciples into cold-blooded, merciless killers, your method might work. But what we need to do is to build the foundation of the residents of Nine Supremes that will last for generations." Yin Yang paused for a moment before continuing. "In your opinion, which of those sects that have stood in the martial world for thousands of years, or even eternally, and are still glorious until now, do not have a sense of honor? Which of them do not protect their own, regardless of whether they are in the right or wrong? Which of them are not loyal and devoted to the sect, risking their lives to protect it? At least in my opinion, only such sects can go further. Those organizations that only care about immediate benefits, such as the Hot Blood Alliance, the Heaven Slaughtering Gang, the Assassin Alliance, and the like. Which one of them didn't quickly get replaced by the newcomers after a few years of prosperity? Did they not perish overnight?" Yin Yang said softly, "Wuchen, these disciples of ours, how are they any different from our children? Can we treat our own children as coldly as we treat our tools? Can we treat them with pure rationality? For example, this time, they have already experienced the cruelty of an instant of life and death. They have also understood the true meaning of the world of martial artists that will never change, and they can even encourage each other. To be able to respect master and martial uncle from the bottom of their hearts, this is already enough. This is already the atmosphere in the sect that I'm happy to see." Yin Yang's tone was heavy as he said, "Brother, a sect, not a gang, a pope or an alliance." A thoughtful look appeared in Shi Wuchen's eyes as he murmured, "It seems that my previous thoughts have greatly deviated from the founding purpose of the residents of Nine Supremes." "It's not that they've completely deviated from the sect's founding principle," said Yin Yang. "They're just too eager for instant success, too eager for success. 24 lives have been sacrificed in this battle. The lessons of blood and tears are too many." "Wuchen," Yin Yang said, "although we don't have enough time to deal with the upcoming challenges, we can't spoil the goose that lays the golden eggs because of this. That will only be neglecting the essentials and leaving a lasting disaster. At the end of the day, they are only teenagers now, and they have just set foot on the path of cultivation not long ago." Luo Dajiang and the others all had thoughtful looks on their faces as they said, "Boss is right. Yes, I also think that this training is a little too harsh. Yes, after this lesson, many of the disciples will not be able to sleep for a while." "Shi Wuchen, why is your heart so cold and ruthless now? So eager for instant success? Have you realized it? Have you changed?" In an instant, Shi Wuchen was besieged by everyone. Everyone felt that what Yin Yang said was right, and they all agreed with him from the bottom of their hearts. On the other hand, Shi Wuchen's method might be equally effective, but it was bound to be accompanied by many sacrifices. The result and the aftermath were difficult for everyone to accept. Especially after such a training, the Demiurge Flawed 10 had just found a new foothold and felt like they were building a family and a career. Yet they had to witness so many separations of life and death with their own eyes, especially when they had watched over them with all their might, yet they could not save them in time. Rather than saying that this training was an unforgettable experience for the disciples, it was more accurate to say that it was a more intense shock to the demiurge-flawed 10 themselves. In this battle, they clearly had absolute martial strength to rely on. Among the enemies, no one was a match for them, and there were not even a few who could withstand even half a move from them. However, it was precisely because of the overwhelming number of enemies that the disciples who followed them could not avoid dying in front of their eyes. Wasn't this feeling of wanting to be powerless and sighing helplessly deeply engraved into one's bones and heart? He would probably be jolted awake by the experience of this battle every single time he dreamt of it at night. As for Shi Wuchen, the one who had suggested this training and insisted on it the most and planned to continue like this in the future, he naturally became the target of everyone's criticism. No one treated him kindly. This fellow actually thinks that there aren't enough dead people. Do you know that my heart is aching so much that I can't even pay the interest now? In the afternoon, the residents of 9 Supremes held a not-so-grand, but unusually formal burial ceremony. All the disciples who had died were buried here. Everyone, including the children who had yet to be accepted by the residents of 9 Supremes, requested to be present. Facing the 24 small graves, all the children were plunged into a silent and desolate atmosphere. The companions who had been with each other yesterday were now lying there silently. Yesterday, they had been cultivating and traveling together, and last night, they had been whispering to each other to cheer for today's battle. Today, however, they were already separated by life and death, walking on different paths. Everyone go back and think about it. Write down your thoughts and submit them. Those who don't know how to write, find someone to do it for you. Yin Yang began assigning homework. These are your own reflections on this battle. What is the martial world? What is life and death? Joining this sect means that you have stepped into the martial world. Facing the moment of life and death, facing the moment of defeat. What are you thinking about? What do you plan to do in the future? 75 disciples. Submit your reflections to your masters after writing them down. As for the other children, submit them to the stewards after writing them down. This is the first lesson for all of you when you step into the martial world. All the children's faces were unusually solemn and solemn. Their childishness was almost gone. Yin Yang's motto for the residents of 9 Supremes may be the weakness of my books. I can't bear to lose. Therefore there are constraints, and sometimes the joy of revenge cannot be aroused. This is my weakness, I know it very well. The concept of home did not start today. Just like the establishment of the Feng family. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.